I'm going to make the Haskara for our Maisels and share a story. If there's anyone on the call who wants to share a story, even ad hoc, feel free to jump in and add a story. 512. El Marachamim Shechen Bam Ramim. Hamatzei Menuchon Nechon Tachas Kanfei Hashechin Al Maras Kadoshim Mitorim Kazarakim Mazerim. Es Nishmo Es Moreinu Tzvi Ben Yoshio Shalach Lo Lemoed. Avu Shanachnu Maskin Es Nishmo Sa Baganet Tem Menuchasa Elochein Balarachamim. Yes, Tira Ebu Say Serek Nafav Lo Edomim Vitz Rabbi Saracham Es Nishmo Sa Adonai Nachal Asoi. Yanuach Bashalayim Amishkavai V'Neimar Amen.
Amen.
Yehi Zichro Baruch. May his memory be blessed. And Baruch, blessed, is from the word Brecha, which is a fountain. And what I mean by that is, may his memory be a fountain of inspiration for us. Everyone has so much guidance and so much light that he shared. My real blessing to all of us as his community and as his friends and as the people that he loved and the people that loved him, that his memory should be a fountain of inspiration for us. I can remember him saying so many times, saying, lighten someone else's burden, care for another Jew, do this mitzvah properly. And didn't say it. He didn't only say it, he lived it. He was that person. His memory should be a brecha, a fountain of inspiration, a fountain of light, a fountain of guidance. And please God, should bring us all closer to each other, closer to our Father in heaven. And he should just look down at us. And smile and get nachas from what he sees from the community. The story I wanted to share is just it's a short story, but it really stuck with me, and it's a lesson that I'm learning in life. I'd love to say I've learned it, but I'm still learning it, in fact. And it's about the power of the pause. And as you know about Rabbi Maisels, he was very, very methodical in everything that he did. Really had a way about doing things, and this was he had thought about it and he did it in a proper way. And once I was discussing with him some of the exceptions that I was studying in Shchita, I was like, I learned this, but it comes up, I've never seen it before. In all 7 months that we've been together, I've never seen it and I've never heard of it. I'm learning all the exceptions. And so he told me, he said, you know what, you have to learn all the exceptions. And he said, let me tell you a story about it. Each thing that he taught me, there's always a story about it. Once, I don't know if it was in Kimberley, some place in the middle of nowhere that begins with a K, that's all I remember, he did a bris milah. And he said after he did that bris, he went, I don't know, it was the next day or later that evening, to go and check on the baby. And he didn't give me all the details, but he said basically when he looked, he said that just, hey, there's a baby. When he looked, he said it didn't look right. It looked terrible. It looked like he hadn't done a proper job. And he was so shocked and disturbed because obviously his name and his reputation was really gold to him and he really looked after it. And he said the first thought that went through his mind was, well, that's my bris milah career gone. Because what it looked like was just terrible. So what he did was he said he went for a walk in the garden. He said he didn't know what to do. He went for a walk in the garden. He walked around the garden of the house a few times. And as he was walking around, he remembered that when he was in yeshiva, he studied all the laws of Brit Milah and some of the exceptions. And 1 out of 1,000 babies has basically a double Brit Milah, a double foreskin. And even if you cut the one all properly, if you look again afterwards, it looked like there's still the foreskin on. And he remembered that. And he went back and he said, oh, that must be the exception. And he did what he needed to do. And it all worked out well. And when he was telling me the story, I just thought, what would I do in such a circumstance? You do something and I would have panicked. I would have phoned somebody. I would have just given up. I would have said, oh, terrible. And he didn't do any of that. A lot of these thoughts were going through his head and he said he needs time to think about it. And he went to walk in the garden. And people often ask me, did Rabbi Maisels do any exercise? I could never imagine him just, walking in the garden for fun. But this was a time where he went for a walk. He said I needed time to clear his head and to work it out and to think about and to to brew over the circumstances, and he went for that walk in the garden. And that, he said, if he hadn't gone for that walk, he would have panicked and he would have just said, look, he's made a mistake, and it all would have been the end. So that's something that I learned from him, and the story that he shared with me, and it's something that I think we all need to. For me, that's that for who I am. I like to make decisions in a rush. So that's something that I've really learned from, and I've really taken the page out of his book. That story stays with me a lot. And I think to myself, okay, go for a walk in the garden for a bit, and then think about it, let it stew, and the right answer always comes up at the end.
Oh, Yiddish. He loved my Yiddish and he tried to speak. And I used to say to him, Rabbi, the brachtse hoiste Zähne, you breaking out your teeth on the Yiddish. He tried very hard. So the best way was to try and talk. Ich bin, ich ken, ich sag, you know. I said, Rabbi, try a little harder. Try. He loved to talk, to try. And he did manage a bit. He did speak a bit of Yiddish. I did appreciate it. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. May his name, his soul be of a blessing to all of us.
Amen.
I thought I would just read to you a short note that I sent to Rabbi Ziegler on Friday night, shortly after he'd made that passionate speech about Rabbi Maisels. So this is what I sent to Rabbi Ziegler. Dear Rabbi Ziegler, thank you for a most touching, thoughtful, and heartfelt service. It was easy to see how your bonding with the late Rabbi Maisels left an indelible impression on you, and that your sorrow at his loss impacted so sincerely on your praise for him. He was truly the essence of patience and spent many hours teaching Avril and I, together with the rest of his adult class, how to read Hebrew. And I can tell you that took some doing and some patience. I remember also how he used to walk to my late father's house every year on Yom Kippur to blow the shofar for my dad during the last few years of his life, when he was too old to go to shul, because he was then in his late 90s. And it didn't matter what the weather was, whether it was blowing like mad, pouring with rain, or terribly hot. Rabbi Maisels always turned up to blow the shofar for my dad. And during the years when Avril was in the Oasis Care Center, he never failed to invite me for supper on Shabbos, although I was seldom able to accept. I will remember fondly how over the many, many years, he always used to call me Mr. Isaacs. I could never, ever get him to call me Len. And I will always remember him and his family, who I knew pretty well before they all left to go to Israel. And I have a special place in my heart for all of them.
Sharing of some special memories with Rabbi Maisels and the Maisels family. During one of our many chats in the early years, Rabbi Maisels promised Brenda and myself that he would always be available to officiate at any of our family simchas, irrespective of where in the world it would be taking place or when. It was quite an undertaking and statement to make, but already showed the unbelievable qualities of this great man. Some years later, once Hillel had qualified as a rabbi, he changed the wording of the promise slightly. And I'll quote directly from Rabbi Maisels. I promise that there will always be a Rabbi Maisels available to officiate at any of your family simchas, irrespective of where in the world it would be or when. Something that has held true ever since and which turned out to be a very good wording change, as I shall shortly explain. We as the Ruch family feel extremely blessed, honored, humbled, and grateful to have been able to share every family simcha from 1986 until the present with a Rabbi Maisels officiating. In fact, history was made in 2013 when for the first and only time ever, both Rabbi Maisels officiated together at the wedding of our son Mark to Yael in Israel. The honor of having both Rabbi Desmond and Rabbi Hillel sitting at the same table, witnessing and signing the ketubah and officiating in the ceremony was something so special that words can never describe the feelings and emotions of that occasion. Both Desmond and Hillel subsequently made mention to Brenda and myself how honored and pleased they were to have been able to jointly officiate at this wedding as father and son, thus creating a bit of Maisels history. Having known the Maisels family for so many years prior, and having watched our children grow up with their children, made the wedding even that much more special. We were truly humbled. In 2014, our daughter Jillian married Saki, also in Israel. Rabbi Desmond had planned to be in Israel for the wedding, and this would have been another Maisels father and son wedding, as they would have officiated as a team for a second time. Unfortunately, even with the best planning possible, and with Rabbi Desmond and myself spending countless hours checking and changing flights, in the end he was forced to cancel his trip at the last minute when one of his visas for another country that he had to visit for kashrut purposes on the way was not approved. Naturally, he was disappointed on the one hand, but very happy on the other, as this provided an opportunity for Hillel to take charge of the entire wedding, which was a very proud moment for Rabbi Desmond and Rebbetzin Esther. Hillel did an amazing job, putting everyone at ease before and during the ceremony. It meant so much to our family, having watched Hillel grow up from a young boy in Camps Bay to becoming a young rabbi marrying our daughter and son-in-law in Israel. Rabbi Desmond's quote of a Maisels, a Rabbi Maisels, will always be available to officiate at any of your family simchas had already come to fruition. In 2017, his amended quote and promise came to the fore once again, this time for the joint Brit Milah of Jillian and Saki's son Daniel and the naming ceremony of their daughter Talia, also in Israel. Daniel and Talia are twins. Jillian and Saki, for those who don't know us that well, are our daughter and son-in-law. Rabbi Desmond tried everything possible to be present for the joint ceremony, as another Maisels history chapter would have been created. Namely, it would have been the first Brit Milah and baby naming ceremony featuring boy and girl twins, jointly officiated by Rabbi Desmond and Rabbi Hillel Maisels. However, his trip was once again thwarted by visa cancellation issues, as well as the fact that Daniel's Brit Milah had to be delayed by 2 weeks to allow him to reach the minimum weight required to safely perform the Brit, and right until the day before, it was touch and go when the Brit would take place. However, Rabbi Desmond assured us all at the time that although he would have loved to be there to do the Brit with Hillel, we should not be worried, because Jillian and Saki's son was going to be in the expert and very steady hands of Hillel, who had by this time become an experienced mohel and came highly recommended by his dad. So what more could anyone ask for? Hillel again turned out to be a superstar. He was meticulous, calm, relaxed, and brilliant in everything he did that day. And we were so happy and proud seeing how he went about his task, thus emulating his dad. A short while after returning back to Cape Town, during an informal chat, Rabbi Maisel said to me, Jerome, he was comfortable, by the way, calling me by my first name, which was great, same as he did with Brenda, as he generally did not refer to too many people by their first names, rather preferring to use the more formal route of surnames. I was also quite happy to call him Desmond if it was just the two of us chatting and the timing was right. So he said, Jerome, now you can see what a good move I made when I asked to change the wording of my promise to A, Rabbi Maisels will always be available to officiate at any of your family simchas. Already, in such a short space of time, I've twice made use of the amended promise and still managed to ensure that a Rabbi Maisels would officiate at any of your functions. I must say, Rabbi Maisels was always true to his word and knew no boundaries to make sure that he never let anybody down, even if it meant traveling to the ends of the earth to fulfill a promise. Another story that I would like to share with you is the following. Rabbi Maisels was a very good taster, a very good food taster. For many years, Brenda and I used to spend countless Wednesday and Thursday nights in the shul kitchen preparing meals for Friday night shul dinners, which took place quite often in those years. We usually started preparing and cooking after the conclusion of Ma'ariv around 7 p.m. and would continue most times till well past midnight. As you all know, Rabbi Maisels worked a very long day, often starting around 4:30 a.m., traveling long distances locally, regionally, and internationally, and only ending when he had completed all his tasks for the day. So he was entitled to feel tired when evening finally came around. However, being a man with endless Duracell bunny energy and always meticulous and thorough in everything he did, often when we were working in the kitchen at night, he made a point of keeping us company for many hours, even though he had the fullest trust in us doing the right thing at all times and always expressed his confidence in us, especially Brenda, whom he had spent so many hours with going through the kashrut books and the small finer details of kashrut, always making sure she was fully up to date with any changes. It was such a pleasure having Rabbi Desmond with us during those lengthy evenings, and our numerous chats and discussions were legendary. We discussed everything from A to B to C and ending with Z. At no point did he ever make us feel like he was watching us or that he was intruding. He used to simply grab a chair, sit down, and we used to shoot the breeze for 4 to 5 hours, never tiring of each other's stories whilst doing our preparing and cooking. Occasionally, as the evening wore on, we could see his eyes starting to roll, and he would then take a quick 40 winks. But when he awoke, he was as sharp as ever, and it was as if he had not missed a moment. Such was the genius of this man. He loved tasting our food and enjoyed every dish that we prepared, especially our soups, which he could not get enough of. He spoke so glowingly of the butternut, minestrone, and split pea soups, and for him, that made the evening something to look forward to. Whilst for us, seeing him enjoy a hearty bowl of soup and then asking for a second portion pleased us greatly, as we knew that he had probably not eaten for many hours before and must have been hungry, even though he would never admit it. The one thing we made sure of was that Rabbi Maisels never left the kitchen hungry after a lengthy evening with us, knowing that he was going to go home, get 3 or 4 hours sleep, and be back on the road again shortly thereafter.
How was it?
Yeah, I see you, Barry.
Very smart, Barry.
My comment around is that Rabbi Maisels' smile was bigger than his smile.
Yeah. So
I think this was the 3rd of March 2013.
30313, yeah, that was the date. So obviously our family had a large connection with Rabbi Maisels, having moved to Cape Town, and the first shul we joined was Camp Spain, and Rabbi Maisels took our family in as our rabbi from day one. But what we didn't know was Rabbi Maisels' connection to my now wife's family in Kimberley many, many years ago, prior to us even meeting, talking about 30, 40 years ago, when Rabbi was in Kimberley or traveling through Kimberley, he would actually stay over and connect with my wife's grandparents who were, in essence, with it Kimberley being a very small Jewish community, they were the chair people of the Jewish community. So the rabbi had a very strong connection to the Kimberley Jewish community and my wife's family, which we had no idea at the time. And when Rabbi found out that Amy was a Salkinder, he was ecstatic and he couldn't believe it that these two families were connecting. And what was so amazing was that Rabbi Maisels' time at Camp Space Shul was coming to an end, and he actually put his last day on hold by 2 weeks, so that his last Shabbat at Camp Space Shul would be our Ofruf at Camp Space Shul. And that's how he ended off his tenure with Camp Space Shul. And it's just a very special memory that he would delay his moving on to something different for us as a family, which was so special. And when I sent we were just looking through random pictures, and this picture popped up on our memories or something today, and I sent it to Rabbi Yochi right away, and the first response was his smile was the biggest in the room, and it was just indicative of how happy he was around people's smachot and being the one to be in the simcha and share it with all of us.
When we heard of Rabbi Maisels' passing, it was as if an earthquake had struck and the ground had moved. He was such a constant in our lives, and we often thought of him, perhaps irreverently, as the Duracell bunny. He was meant to endure, to go on and on, to be in our lives, and to share in our life cycle events forever. Rabbi Maisels and Esther were always available to accept our invitations and played such a vitally important role in creating the wonderful memories of these events. The Rabbi's smile, kindness, generosity, thoughtfulness, work ethic, and above all, his impish sense of humor helped to keep everything in perspective and served as a wonderful example of how to live a Jewish life filled with quality and service, and to enjoy the ride whilst doing so. For many years, we exchanged annual birthday gifts. I would buy Rabbi Maisels a book of short stories or essays, often relating to travel, and he would find me books relating to cats or other subjects that he knew I enjoyed. The books I gave him were always short stories or essays, because he confided to me that the only time he really had to read was on the plane, and so short stories were the easiest to read. The last book I gave him was for his birthday in October 2019, not long before he experienced his unfortunate health crisis on a flight from Johannesburg to Cape Town. The book's title is The Kindness of Strangers, and he said the timing was perfect because it was the kindness of strangers on that flight that helped him survive the incident. Rabbi Maisels was definitely no stranger, and in his many kindnesses were legend. And there were countless occasions on which he showed kindness to people without public publicity or any need for recognition. He knew I had a weakness for marshmallows, the kosher variety of which were only found locally at Pesach time. And so every year, when he went to supervise the kashrut of a local sweet factory that produced items for Pesach, he would smuggle me a packet or two of the fabulous marshmallows before they even appeared on the supermarket shelves. I felt very honored and enjoyed every mouthful, even more because of his kindness in sourcing them for me. Rabbi Maisels enjoyed interacting with people and enjoyed all hands-on activities. He did not particularly enjoy writing articles for the then monthly newsletters issued by Camp Space Shul. He dreaded the deadlines given to him and usually extended these by several days at least, until with great relief and a big smile, he brought me the finished product. I learned quickly to set the deadlines at least a week before the article was required, but he soon caught onto this, and he continued to set his own deadlines instead. The marvelous thing about this sort of situation was that Rabbi Maisels was always so good-natured about it, and we could always enjoy a great laugh, even whilst dealing with any frustrations or difficulties. Avron nagged Rabbi Maisels endlessly to please write a book on your incredible and often unique experiences. And I've learned that Natalie Barnett did the same. Rabbi Maisels' response was inevitably that he did not have the time, but if he had to consider doing so, it would only be when he retired one day. That is one deadline that he most unfortunately, and to our great loss, succeeded in avoiding. On many occasions, Rabbi Maisels was ready, willing, and able to pick up a screwdriver or hammer and fix whatever needed fixing in the shul and at his home. It gave him great pleasure to save us having to call in someone to do the work at our expense. His medical training probably gave him some valuable skills in fixing what is broken. He loved building his home sukkah and calculated exactly the measurements thereof, designed with great precision and attention to detail to enable accommodating the maximum numbers of guests at Sukkot meals, so beautifully catered for by Esther and family. Rabbi Maisels always had a kind and cheerful word for the support staff at CBS, and Casper Daniels, Joan Withering, Vumile Mbeki, and Beauty Busso were extremely upset to hear of his passing. Casper wrote, "It was a shock for me. We lost an icon of a man who was always there for everybody, and I will miss his kind words and chat with me whenever he came to shul." Beauty Busso recalled an incident in May last year during the hard lockdown when she had to attend the Somerset Hospital clinic and found herself on the main road in Greenpoint with very little prospect of transport back to Camps Bay. Rabbi Maisels happened to park not far away, and as he walked past her, greeted her with his usual, "Hi, Sisi, what are you doing here?" Beauty explained, and the rabbi teasingly suggested that she should walk home. He then told her to wait for him until he had done his shopping, so that he could give her a lift to Camps Bay, which he duly did, even though he was only returning to his home in Seapoint. Vumile Mbeki delivered newspapers for many years, including to 23 the Sheviots, and he too remembered Rabbi Maisels with great fondness and respect. He spoke about how Rabbi Maisels taught him how to build a shul sukkah with the utmost attention to halachic details, and Mbeki has been building the shul sukkah ever since then, except for 2020, that's another story. Rabbi Maisels would always take his time to chat to Mbeki in Kosa, and Rabbi would be respected always for respect that he himself showed to those with whom he interacted. My late brother, Peter Sternberg, living in Cape Town at the time, met up with Rabbi Maisels in Bloemfontein some years ago to drive him to Harare, stopping off at several small towns in order to check on the kashrut of food products at various factories. When Peter drove, the rabbi suggested he go faster, and when the rabbi drove, Peter begged him to drive more slowly. They arrived in Harare later than anticipated, and so it was too late to inspect the factory there as planned. As Rabbi was enjoying supper with his hosts at the home where he was being accommodated, the phone rang. The factory had remained open to enable the rabbi to check their products. By the time the rabbi arrived back home, it was time to go to the airport and catch a plane back to Johannesburg in time for a meeting. No sleep that night. Rabbi Maisels loved traveling, no matter where and no matter how. His countless local and overseas trips were planned meticulously by him, and he would have made an outstanding travel agent. His knowledge of flight and bus schedules was legendary, and he put together many trips that encompassed a wide variety of destinations, often with mere minutes between connecting flights. He was often worried about the practicality of catching flights that left after short periods of transit, but I personally never heard that he had missed any of these, although the only features Rabbi saw in many of the multitude of towns, cities, and countries he visited often focused only on the airport and the factories he was inspecting. Rabbi Maisels was determined while visiting China one year to see the Great Wall of China. This he managed to arrange, and on his return to Cape Town reported glowingly about his visit there, one of the many highlights of his many travels. Tellingly, however, it was the people with whom he interacted and worked who were the greatest interest to him, and with his gifts of mimicry and recollections, he was a brilliant raconteur, who kept many of those who were lucky enough to hear his stories endlessly enthralled and amused. For many years, until the advent of email, Rabbi Maisels took time and trouble to send me postcards from the many exotic and some more familiar destinations visited by him. The challenge of sourcing and choosing the postcards and the stamps was just one of the many that he seemed to enjoy, and he loved seeing the postcards displayed in the shul office on his return. Some years ago, the Maisels family visited my home of Gatuma, now Kaduma, in Zimbabwe. I hope I pronounced that right, Judy. They went to my parents' home, where the rabbi vaulted over the locked gate to knock on the door. He enjoyed a chat and asked directions to the home of my brother and sister-in-law, Peter and Hermione. The Maisels family then arrived at their flamboyant close home and, as arranged, parked their motorhome in the driveway overnight. After a chat, they retired to sleep in their motorhome, with the use of the house facilities via an unlocked kitchen door. Rabbi Maisels said that they could not drive through Gatuma without seeing where I had grown up and lived until I moved to Cape Town. Hermione took the Maisels family on a short tour of the town before they continued their great Zimbabwe adventure, or to Bulawayo, where they had arranged to park their motorhome at the rabbi's home in that city. As with all the rabbi's travels and activities, every detail had been worked out well in advance. To end this tribute, although this has to be a work in progress every hour and every day bringing more memories to mind, I need to mention that saying of Rabbi Maisels that has remained with me from the time I heard him mention this in his sermon. You never know where the ball will bounce. One cannot tell how one's actions, good or bad, may affect others. So do all you can to let your thoughts, deeds, and actions be for the good. Rabbi Maisels will be hugely missed by all those who had the privilege of knowing, interacting, and working with him. It is almost impossible to absorb now that he is gone to his eternal rest. But we do accept wholeheartedly that it is a rest that he richly deserves. May his dear soul rest in peace. Yehi zichro baruch. May his memory be for a blessing.
It's from Rabbi Ori Einhorn. And he says that, did you know that South Africa is ranked third in the world in terms of labeled kosher items after Israel and the United States, which means that anywhere in South Africa you travel, you are able to find a variety of marked kosher products, no need for lists, although there's also available, even in the most remote of places. This is done with the efforts of the South African Beth Din, which the Jews of South Africa are united behind and support tremendously. One kashrut for one people. With a tremendous machloket, usually involving kashrut and money issues, the South African system is one to be envy of. But it's not by chance. There are wonderful people behind the system that are pious, moral, and do everything in their power to make it happen. And they go to a great length to provide the quality and variety of products to the South African Jewish people. Let me introduce you to one of these amazing people I've ever met in my life, Rabbi Maisels. Out of South Africa, you haven't heard of him, but you should know he is one of the world's biggest experts in kashrut. But more than that, he is a humble and wonderful human being that the success story of South African Beth Din label is largely due to him. A short story to emphasize the length that he goes to ensure people would want to eat kosher. It's 5 o'clock in the morning. We find ourselves in a compound full of sheep on the way to the slaughterhouse outside of Cape Town to supply meat for the kosher deli. Rabbi Maisels inspects their back and teeth. I ask him as a student, are you looking for kashrut issues? He answers also, but I want that the meat we supply will be the best quality, not fatty, but not lean, not old and not too young. So the Jewish people will always rave about South African lamb chops. To see a rabbi running after sheep, examining them for meat quality is a memory that sticks. So the next time you go to South Africa and your kid's in the back of the car crying for a snack and you stop anywhere or go to the local spa or anything to buy flings, chips, chocolate candies or anything else in the middle of nowhere, remember this man and his love for kashrut and for Jews.
I met Rabbi Maisels in the mid-80s when I relocated to Welkom for a short period of time after my parents passed away. And he was the rabbi in Bloemfontein. And we would go to Bloemfontein for functions, for HOD, and even then, 35 odd years ago, he was the most incredible, friendly person. I came back to Cape Town in 1990, and in 1992, I joined Camp Shul, where Rabbi Maisels was the rabbi. And we really got on. We had an incredible relationship. With Raymond's father, Rabbi Klitzner, Rabbi Maisels kind of co-bar mitzvahed my two sons 25 plus years ago. He buried both of Beverly's parents. So there was a personal relationship with him. When I decided to go on my own after being at New York Bagels for 15 odd years, I approached Rabbi Maisels and I asked him what I should do. And he said, sure, I've even got a place for you to work out of. My brother-in-law owns the Belmont Hotel. I'll phone him. And so in the middle of 2008, I started producing my own products. And there's no ways I could ever have succeeded or even failed if it hadn't been with the assistance of Rabbi Maisels. Every single ingredient he sourced, he found, he approved, he okayed. He ensured it was the best product that was on the market and that it would allow me to make a marker. And year after year, my products grew. And about 12 years ago, after I'd been in business maybe a year or two, he said to me, "Why don't you do Pesach?" I said, "All right, but I can't do Pesach." He said, "I'll show you." And he did. And the very first year, he said to me, "We need to kosher your kitchen for Pesach." And he told me what was involved. And boy, was I in for a surprise. In true Rabbi Maisels' time, he said, "I'll be there after shul on Sunday night." And this was maybe 2 or 3 months before Pesach. And he arrived at 8 o'clock. He'd been to visit somebody. He'd been to see a sick somebody in hospital. And what should have taken maybe an hour and a half took 4 hours. He finished about 1 o'clock in the morning. And for 50% of the time we chatted, we spoke. And he just had a unique way about him of making you feel comfortable, feeling at home. And he made me comfortable and he gave me confidence. When it came to koshering the kitchen, he had his own way of doing it. It was unique to him, and obviously it worked. He would arrive in a pair of overalls, probably similar to what he did shchita in, and an old stainless steel kettle with a plug-in handle that you had to plug in and boil for maybe 10 minutes before the kettle boiled. And he wouldn't use anything else but this kettle. And every surface had to be cleaned and washed down. And he did it. And it was no hassle. And he didn't need any help. But the stories he told in between waiting for the kettle to boil are stories that I will never forget, and perhaps for another time. Over the years, my range grew, and as it grew, so did my relationship with Rabbi Maisels grow stronger. Every year I brought out new products, and they certainly were not mine. They were Rabbi Maisels. He guided me, he told me where to source products, where to find ingredients. I remember last year he said to me, "Why don't you do baby food?" Rabbi, "I don't want to do baby food." He said, "I've got a manufacturer. You need to find a bottle and a label, and I'll get you baby food." Obviously, I needed an outlet, and Checkers, ShopRite weren't interested. So I did other stuff. This year, we were going to do a few more products, which obviously we didn't do. I'm doing less this year, also given the COVID situation, and nobody knows what kind of Pesach we will have. One year, he got me pineapple, dried pineapple, from a farmer he knew near the Orange River. On many occasions, when people were short of products for Pesach or specific ingredients, he would go to the specific factory and make the products himself. One Friday morning, I needed fish spice. So after shul, off he went to a company called Deli Spices, and he made the fish spice himself. He brought it to me, having paid for it. He was unbelievable. He knew no boundaries when it came to assisting anybody. He was not harsh with criticism, but he was so helpful. He would point out if I'd done something wrong, and he would correct it, but with dignity. He didn't make me feel small or inadequate. And when I was doing brachas at the shul, the same applied. He let me do whatever I wanted to do, and if there was something wrong, he would tell me subtly and not in front of anybody. Sadly, this year we were due to kosher my kitchen on Sunday the 17th, 2 days after he passed away. I knew I had to do it. Pesach has to go ahead, and life is such that it has to go on. So with the assistance of David Jubila and David Cohen, I did kosher my kitchen. It took 2 hours. It wasn't fun. It was a job that had to be done, and it was done. And I'm currently preparing for Pesach. When I used to drop Rabbi Maisels off on the Sunday night, it would sometimes be as late as 1 o'clock. And he'd look at his watch and say, gee, I'm early. I can still get 3 hours sleep before Shchita in the morning. He was that kind of guy. I will miss him. And the input that he put into providing so many kosher products, not only for Cape Townians, but throughout the country, and in fact throughout the world, can never ever be replaced by anybody. He used to show me when he came to Checkers, he would pick up a tin of tuna and he'd say, you see printed there, Rabbi Maisels with a Hebrew date. I went to the Philippines 6 months ago. I did 700,000 tins of tuna and they all went to Checkers. He just did it. Nobody knew about it. He did it. The products arrived and nobody was any the wiser who had koshered them or where they had come from. So my memory of Rabbi Maisels will be a fondness and of somebody that was a mentor to me and who actually taught me more about food than anybody else could have taught me. It was an absolute pleasure working with him, and I will miss him. And I'm grateful. I will be eternally grateful for having been a part of Rabbi Maisels' life and he being a part of mine.
Beautiful,
Thank
Barry.
you.
Thank you very much for sharing that.
Barry.
It's wonderful memories.
Yeah,
As I said,
Barry.
we're going to read it. It's recorded.
Neil spoke about this, and you've also spoken about it. Jacob, when asked by Pharaoh how many years did he live, and how were the days of the years that he lived, and I thought that Rabbi Maisels never wasted any days. He just was engrossed, as you said, in holy thoughts and holy work the whole time. He never wasted the days of his years.
Unfortunately, Rabbi, I only became a member of the Camp Shul very late in Rabbi Maisels' term of office, because I was part of Skunda Street and then Shirach Hadashah, and came across right at the end when Shirach Hadashah joined up with Camp Shul. But when I think of Rabbi Maisels, 3 thoughts immediately always come into my mind when I hear the name Rabbi Maisels. The first one is gratitude that a couple of months ago, when Diane's uncle, who passed away yesterday, was quite seriously ill and he was in hospital, and the family wanted a rabbi to go and visit Nathan, Diane's uncle. I knew that Rabbi Maisels and Nathan Lazarus knew one another, so I thought he would be the most apt rabbi to go visit him because they did have a connection. And without hesitation, there was COVID going on. There was no doubt in his mind that he would go visit Uncle Nathan because basically that's the type of man Rabbi Maisels was. The second thought I always have of Rabbi Maisels concerns my father. Now, Rabbi Maisels used to go to Skunda Street Shul when he was much younger, before he became a rabbi even. And my father and our family were members there for many years. And my father, if he was not a medical doctor, he would have loved to be in a chazan. It gave him great joy to sing in the shul. He had a really good voice, and whenever he had the opportunity, he would sing in the shul. For instance, Kantor Kusavitsky in those days would do the hakafot once or twice on Simchat Torah, and then hand it over to my dad, and my dad, with great joy, would leave the congregation around a few times singing the hakafot. Also on Sukkot, when we used to have Kiddush in the hall, after the first night of Sukkot, Kantor Kusavitsky would let my dad say Kiddush again with much great joy. And Rabbi Maisels would always remind me of that and say how much he used to enjoy listening to my dad sing, which I thought was really nice. Right? Whenever I see him, especially on Sukkot or Simchat Torah, he would mention that to me, which I really appreciated. And the third and last thing which I'm grateful to Rabbi Maisels for is he'd already left the shul. He was no longer the Camps Bay rabbi when my daughter got married. But because he had this family connection, he knew my mother, he knew my father, and he knew my family going back so many years, I asked him to be the co-participate in the marriage of my daughter. And once again, without hesitation, he agreed. He was there. He told wonderful stories about my family under the chuppah, which was such a pleasure to listen to. So those are the three items when I think of Rabbi Maisels that come to mind. And I, for one, will surely miss him.
Tribute to Rabbi Desmond Maisels. Rabbi Desmond Maisels was one of the greatest persons I've ever met in my lifetime. I think he was 1 or 2 years younger than me. I first bumped into the then medical student, Rabbi Desmond Maisels, about 1965 or 1966, when we were in our early 20s. He was residing at Herzliya Hostel as a housemaster. He had told me of an incident at camp which saw him lose a toe. I was to later discover, years later, that he had lost all the toes on one foot. I also learned subsequently that it's kosher to sometimes tell white lies. I remember his exact words as if they were yesterday. He remarked, "I'm pleased that happened to me and not to anybody else because of my relationship with Hashem." I replied quite seriously, "You must become a rabbi. You should give up medicine." I reminded Rabbi Maisels of this conversation on many subsequent occasions because of the role I felt I had played in his career. Years later in Australia, my career was to move into executive recruitment. He was the rabbi in Bloemfontein before heading off to Cape Town and ultimately to Camps Bay. I was never Howard, but always Mr. Joffe. He was Victor Ladorium and vice head boy of Gray's College, Port Elizabeth. He was one of the most unassuming men on the planet. Nothing was too much for him. I know of a case where he once walked in the rain from Camps Bay to Edgemead to preside at a bar mitzvah, about 15-kilometer walk. A cousin of mine was in hospital for a chunk of time, and Rabbi Maisels visited him every day for months on end. It needs to be said, not as a criticism, but as a praise, that he was not without blemish. He was too nice, always wanting to please. His knowledge of kashrut is known worldwide. The greatest tribute I can give to Rabbi Maisels is to say that when one thinks of an approachable rabbi, there cannot be many who would walk ahead of him. Rabbi Maisels was and is the measure. I must pay tribute at this juncture to the knowledgeable Rebbetzin Esther, who complimented her husband in every way. Esther always referred to Rabbi Maisels as my husband, which was so cute. Cape Town and South Africa have lost a wonderful human being and a wonderful teacher. I cannot imagine attending shul without seeing him. May his dear soul rest in peace. Howard Joffe, Camps Bay.
My few words I want to say about Rabbi Maisels, it doesn't come from the same perspective as deep and personal like Barry. Mine actually highlights Rabbi Maisels as the man who was unbelievably committed, and his dedication was just beyond to the Jewish community, to the greater Jewish community, and to his multifaceted role as an individual, as a rabbi of Camps Bay, as a moal, as a shochet. And my story goes back before I even came to Camps Bay. I only came to Camps Bay 20 years ago. This goes back almost just on 30 years ago when he did the bris of my son, Jonathan, who is going to be 30 in May. So we're going back just short of 30 years, 1991. And the bris took place on a Friday morning. And the rabbi usually visits the child at least within the first 24 hours to make sure that he had done a superb job. But 24 hours after Friday morning was Saturday morning, which was Shabbos. And not only did the rabbi have his duties as the pulpit at Camps Bay, but he also couldn't get to Claremont due to the distance. Having said that, there were times when Rabbi Maisels walked to Constantia to do a bris, if it had to be on a Shabbos morning. But visiting the child, he couldn't do. So he said he would come Motzei Shabbos, which was after Shabbat on the Saturday night, which is slightly more than 24 hours. He phoned on the Saturday night, which was a terribly windy, rainy and cold night in the southern suburbs in winter of May 1991, to ask for directions, which we gave him. But I did suggest to him that as the weather was terrible, why doesn't he wait until Sunday morning? But Rabbi Maisels, back to his commitment and his dedication to whatever he did, he said, no, I've already missed my 24-hour deadline. I will come tonight. And sure as anything, at about 8:30 or 9 p.m. on the Saturday night, he arrived at my house in Claremont. And we let him in, and he spent a lot of time as if time wasn't an issue. And he left, and he was very happy with his job. And I'm sure 30 years later, he would still be very happy with his job. And I walked with him, I'm not sure if John is on the Zoom, I walked with him to his car, and there in his car, I saw movement, and I said, Rabbi, there looks like there's someone in your car. He said, no, all my kids are in the car. I said, well, it's 9 o'clock and it's on a Saturday night. He said, yes, I promised my children, because it was a terrible windy day in Camps Bay as well. We had nothing, we couldn't do anything on the Shabbos. I promised them, what's a Shabbos? I would take them for a drive. And I did that. I took them for a drive, and I've come to your house, to the priest. I said, why didn't you let them come in the house at least and not sit in the car for an hour freezing cold? He said, no, I didn't want to put you out. You've got a new child and I didn't want to put you out. That again shows his humility and the fact that he puts everybody else first. But the real punchline for me was when I said goodbye to him, I said, well, at least you can now go home with the kids and, get into your house and where it's nice and warm. He said, no, I'm on my way to Constantia. And this reminded me what Barry had said, with his kettle and a blowtorch, because there's a family that just moved into a house in Constantia, and he promised them he would come Motzei Shabbos to kasher their kitchen. So, as I said, I would like to close how I opened. This wasn't a deep and necessary personal account of myself and Rabbi Maisels as Barry was, but it certainly highlighted the man in terms of his commitment and his dedication to the greater Jewish community in his multifaceted role that he played over the last 40 years.
I was privileged to know his dad, the doctor, and his mom, and then, of course, his in-laws, Stan Kahn and Barbara, the late Stan and Barbara, and the whole family. And I also met in Australia Barbara's twin sister, Rabbi Maisels' other sister, Heather. And what I can tell you was I always put Rabbi Maisels down as the most questionable rabbi, because if you had a question to ask Rabbi Maisels, and just when you thought that you could approach him and ask him that question that you'd been waiting to ask him, you'd find there were two other people waiting with their questions, a minimum of two other people, and he was always ready and willing to answer. So he was definitely one of the feelings that anybody had was that he was the go-to rabbi if you had a question to ask. He was so approachable, and his answer would fit you and your knowledge of whatever you were asking. The other thing that always struck me about Rabbi Maisels, I went to him and I had an old pair of tefillin. I think most of us older guys always had an old pair of tefillin that we got from an uncle that came out of the bottom drawer who never laid tefillin. And they were all the small little the small boxes. And I had a pair of tefillin straps which were now brown, and they must be black. So I said, where will I get a pair of, be able to obtain a pair of black tefillin straps? And he said, don't worry, that'll cost you a lot of money. I will give it to me, and I've got black ink, I will blacken them. And this is something that he was always, and I think you gentlemen at Camps Bay know, that he was always there to keep the costs of everything down whenever he could. He would never go out of his way to spend money with the community's money unless he probably really had to. And I think they probably, in Camps Bay, you'd give me more examples of this particular characteristic of the rabbi. And he went out of his way to get kosher food at the best possible prices, and so that everybody could have as many big selection of kosher foods as possible. at the bottom of our building where I lived in the Standard Bank, the lady opened up a fruit juice shop, and she, you know, the usual question is, how can I get the rabbi to give a blessing so that the product will be kosher? And in no time, he came in and he spoke to the lady, told her what she could do and what she couldn't do. And in quite a short time, this little shop downstairs had a hechsher. The other characteristic of Rabbi Maisels used to come to Arthur's Road, and if he was wearing a tie, then you knew you didn't say Tachnun, because he was off to do a bris. That was when we saw him in shul, they'd say, is he wearing a tie? So that was one of the characteristics. The amount of people's kitchens that he must have koshered in Cape Town, I don't know how many he would have koshered. And even at the last minute for Pesach, he would be running around koshering kitchens, and in other instances for Sukkot, he would be running around and building sukkahs for people when he should have been at home, maybe building his own sukkah or attending to his own family. He always was out there doing something for the community. If you looked at, well, I think it changed after a while, but if you ever looked at that old station wagon he drove, I think it was, I'm not sure, I think it was a Hyundai. It didn't look like much, but he didn't go and look for a fancy car. As long as it did what it was supposed to do, he was quite happy with it. Some of the photographs that I was going to show you were when he spoke to us when we had the Rosh Chodesh breakfast. And one thing I remember him telling us how he went all over the world, and like the mountains, Harag Rizim, towards the end of the Torah, he said the best tea was grown on a certain side of the mountain. So if he went to select the tea, when he went to Ceylon or wherever he went, and he went to many, many places, he told us about which side of the mountain we'd get our best tea on, because that's got the sunlight. The other thing was that and it had happened last week, Parshat Beshalach, many years ago, one Shabbos morning, we decided to raid Camps Bay, and we walked through all the way to Camps Bay, nice and early in the morning up Kloof Road, and we got to Camps Bay, and it was Parshat Beshalach, and Rabbi Maisels lined the Song of the Sea. And with all due respect to Rabbi Ziegler, who's an excellent and lovely liner, I've never heard a Shir Hayam lined like that. And in fact, afterwards we said if we would have had to walk through to Landudno, we would have done so. Hout Bay was pushing it a bit, but Landudno was still within reason. And I actually mentioned this in an email that I wrote to Hillel, and he said, strangely enough, he tried to remember the tune that his dad lined this last Shabbos when he lined it. And it's just one of those fond memories. And before the lockdown, I asked him, I said, Rabbi, I said, please, I'd love to record your lining of the Shir Shel Yam. And he said, you know, when I was in Camps Bay, I lined every week. I was on top of everything, he says, but now, he says, I'm out of practice. And I thought, you know, you're such a perfectionist, you want to do it correctly. And I respected that, because everything he did, he put his heart and soul into. And it was just a very special, he was just a very, very special man, giving of his time to the community. And if he was going to phone you back, if you left a message, you could be sure if the phone rang at 11 o'clock at night, that was Rabbi Maisels phoning you back. And somebody said, who's going to replace him? Because he was a shochet, he was a mole, he was a sofer, he was a jack of all trades and an absolute master of all of them. And my answer straight away was probably 3 people would have to replace him. And I think that, Rabbi, with all due respects to you, you realize how hard he worked to go and be a shochet and then come and do what he had to do. He certainly wasn't a trade unionist. He didn't have his hours. He just worked his heart out for the community. And those are very brief words that I have to say about a man who's a good friend to have, a brilliant all-rounder, and a family man and his family was his whole community, the whole community of Cape Town, and stretching it a worldwide community.
A tribute to Rabbi Maisels, again from Rita and Ellen Margot. We have all experienced our relationship in many different ways and in many areas with Rabbi Maisels. His versatility brought him into contact with a multitude of people, deeds, and tasks, huge in range and far-reaching, extending to helping pupils with their maths homework, very far and beyond the realm of his duties. Ours was a unique relationship. He knew we were not regular shulgoers, yet when we needed him or he needed us, we were there for each other. He spoke to me in Afrikaans, knowing I taught Afrikaans. He invited us to his home at 23 the Sheviets for Shabbat and Sukkot. He made sure every single congregant was invited to his home. The warmth, excellent food, and atmosphere were so welcoming. Esther's famous lentil dish is still part of my favorites. On a few occasions, he came to our house. What was so incredible that this talented, brilliant man wanted to bounce off important events in his life that he felt safe to talk to us, to talk about with us. We greatly value that. I shall mention just 2 examples. The first, many years ago, being his conflict with Gilla, so badly wanted to go to the matric dance with a partner, a father trying to please his child. It was a cold, typically windy night in Camps Bay, yet he came. It worried him. The second, his bewilderment and grave disappointment and forgiveness at being asked to discontinue as Rabbi of Camps Bay Shul after 29 years. He even found reason for this decision. He was, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically he was disappointed by it, and he came to talk to them about this decision and what to do with it. His humility, his openness, his acceptance of our way of practicing our Jewishness, his contribution to every aspect of all of our lives is something we shall all remember and be grateful for. What an example, unsurpassable. A part-time rabbi who performed like 2 full-time rabbis. The dignity of you, Esther, at Panans on Sunday and at the funeral is something we can only marvel at. Your trip and arrival in this manner in Israel, greeting your children under such unimaginable conditions, is beyond our meager comprehension. You are a giant, and together with your children, handled laying Rabbi to rest in the most incredible way that can only be explained, to quote you, Hashem on one side and Desmond on the other. Every one of you as a family made him proud and left the rest of us in awe at your bravery, courage, strength, humility, and sheer marvelousness. There are no words to describe each one of you, despite my being an author. That speaks to what kind of base and environment and faith and support you all were and are to one another, rocks, unshakable rocks. Goodbye, Rabbi. Rest in peace. And thank you for living a life we can only try in some tiny measure to emulate. You shall never be forgotten. We were so fond of you. Your family was blessed to have you, and we, mere non-conforming burgis, were lucky to have known you in the unique way that we did. Wishing the family a long life. Sincerely, Rita and Ellen Margot.
Our relationship with the Maisels, the Klitzner family and the Maisels family goes back many, many years. Given that the rabbi was the rabbi of Zichrono Livracha, Rabbi Maisels was the rabbi in Bloemfontein. And when my dad got to Welkom, he was there already when my dad got to Welkom as the reverend of the community in about 1969, 1970. I'm open to correction, but was there and thereabouts. Well, my father, I suppose, did the right thing, and he phoned up Rabbi Maisels in Bloemfontein to introduce himself as the new reverend in Velkom. And when he did so, Rabbi Maisels wasn't available, but he spoke to Rebbitzin Maisels. And at the end of the conversation, he obviously had introduced himself, and he introduced himself as Reverend Klitzler. Well, the story is told and often repeated by the late Rabbi Maisels that Rebbitzin Maisels could not understand how a reverend had phoned her of a Jewish community. Where she came from in America, reverends were of the Methodist or the Presbyterian nature and church, and she would never be able to understand that Reverend Klitzner of the Welcome Hebrew congregation had actually phoned. And this was a story that Rabbi Maisels told very, very often. So the relationship between our families was really strong. In fact, when my parents retired from Belcom, it coincided with their golden wedding anniversary, and the Kehillah gave my parents a huge farewell dinner, and Rabbi Maisels was flown up from Cape Town to be the guest speaker on the evening. Rabbi Maisels, as we all know, was an unbelievable Leiner, rabbi, moil, shochet, dayan of the Beth Din, a kashrut, extreme authority, and a sofer. And the late rabbi always, but more importantly, he was an absolute and complete mensch. And that to me portrays every human being, Jewish human being particularly, but every human being. And that all that he was, all the titles I accredited him to, and everybody has alluded to over the last month, the fact is that he was an absolute mensch. His kindness was superb. He was a shining example of the tripod that the world stands on. Gemilut Chasadim, Avodah, and Masim Toivim. But particularly, Gemilut Chasadim, and I quote the example of when my wife was running the Can project, and she once met with Rabbi Maisels, and she told Rabbi Maisels that she just couldn't get honey anywhere, kosher honey, whichever honey she needed. And he lifted his left eye to the top corner of the eye, as he so often did. And a week later, 2 boxes, absolutely 24 bottles of honey arrived at our door, and he'd organized it all. But ladies and gentlemen, friends, our rabbis, just like us, are just normal human beings, like all of us. And so the rabbi also had a bit of a mischievous twinkle in his eye, if I might call it that. And for example, I very often was the gabbai on the bimah when the rabbi was laying. And he would call up somebody, and the person would be known to him to be somebody who, when it got to the fellow's mishaberach, the blessings of all the people that the fellow wanted to do, it was going to be a long and drawn out. And he'd sort of mumble under his beard to me. This could go on for 10 minutes. And to me, that was always very, very amusing, because that was Rabbi Maisels over and over again. Whenever he had to talk, speak, sermonize, he never enjoyed that, for those of you who thought he did. He really didn't enjoy it. His sermons to bar mitzvah boys were absolutely superb, always. They were unfailing. But in general terms, if, for example, at the Kiddush Brocha, he was asked unexpectedly to speak, he'd mumble under his beard again, I wish they'd leave me alone. Sorry, that's my dog. Sorry, forgive me for a moment. The majority of the years that Rav Maisels, Zichrono Livracha, was our rabbi, he would never, ever allow us on a Shabbos morning at the Kiddush Brocha to make motzi. He wouldn't allow us to make motzi on the basis that, learning out of Torah, that there was a saying in the Birkat Hamazon that particularly was out of Torah, and he was very, very frightened always. He didn't believe that people would make motzi and then do the benching afterwards, which was sacrilege and not right by him. So one Pesach, we had the ladies put out a lot of matzah for us. He somehow got an overload, and he absolutely collected all the matzah and he hid it away. We could not make a motzi whether we liked it or not, because firstly, the guys felt there was smoked salmon, there was no kichel at the time, and there was no matzah to eat the smoked salmon with. A year later, same story happened. We all felt, we need to eat our smoked salmon with some matzah. We knew there was matzah from the previous year, but what he had done with it? Well, we found it hidden away under the Oren Kodesh, and we took it to the brocha room, and we made the ladies put it out. And the rabbi, upset as he was, he accepted it. From then on, we made motzi, we made brocha, and we benched, and we did everything as he wanted us to do it. Forgive me for a moment. Another inspiring aspect of Rabbi Maisels was obviously his unstinting kashrut knowledge. He absolutely adored and was so learned in anything that was related to kashrut, to the extent that every, what do we call it, the Sudas Rishit, when he had to say his few words after we had sung our songs, he would talk words of kashrut, always. And a particular liking of his was the kingklip fish, because whether, and you must forgive me now, because I'm sure whether the debate was there were no fins or there were no scales, I can't quite recall. But he discussed this ad infinitum with ourselves. And every week it was going to be a topic of kashrut and particularly fish in this regard. So much so that the guys eventually would say, before we started and sat down to the Sudah, they would say, which fish tonight? It was a question that was asked us. Folks, these were just some of the funnier moments that we shared with Rabbi Maisels, but his kindness, his goodness, his untold kindness to all of us and to the Kehillah, to the larger Kehillah of Cape Town, to the Drum Africa, to South Africa, to the world at large, will go as sustenance, as sustaining ourselves forevermore of blessed memory of himself. And may we all always remember him being sustained in similar way, more particularly his family so, and us joining them always forevermore. Amen, amen.
Could speak for ages. I suppose everybody could speak for ages about Desmond, but okay, my association with him goes back over 60 years. Obviously, when we both lived in Port Elizabeth, it was Madrich of a few people, a few very famous people, Ivan Saltzman, Desmond, etc., etc., etc. And so we knew each other very well in Port Elizabeth. Our paths went the other way. He went to Bloemfontein as a rabbi. I came to Cape Town. But we linked up again when Kelly became his secretary, and we became closer and closer and closer. Just to mention that the day that David Jubiler phoned from to tell us what had happened, I mean, I felt that my world had come to an end, because the man was part of me. If you can understand, we spoke the same language, we came from the same city, we knew the same people. So when we got together, we spoke for virtually hours, and it was wonderful. And I felt as if something had been wrenched away from me. And I said to myself, what am I going to do? Well, you know, who do I turn to? And he was the most amazing guy. Obviously, there are many stories. I just want to tell one or two. For example, at my 70th birthday, the kind of sense of humor he had. I had my 70th, Barry Berkowitz catered, and we had it at Camps by Shore. And I stood up, and it just so happened that my 70th birthday that day was the 18th of October, which happened to be Des Maisels' birthday. So I announced, while I was giving my little speech, that it just so happens to be Rabbi Maisels' birthday too. And he stood up straight away, as quick as you can, and he said, does this mean I have to pay for half the party? So that was his kind of humor.
So, you know, we spoke closer to each other. We spoke Afrikaans to each other. And one or two stories that people may know, may not know, I'm not quite sure. On the one occasion when he was coming back from Schitter, and he was involved in an accident on the N1. I suppose a lot of people know the story. But obviously he was wearing the white coat and full of blood. So when the ambulance arrived there, they wanted to examine him and see. He said, no, I'm fine. There's no problem. He said, but what about all the blood? He said, no, that's from the cow. So they were absolutely lost. They couldn't understand. So this man was absolutely great. You know, he was so much to everybody. He just made me feel like $1 million. He would never forget, look, I'm not as good as some of the Gedolim when it comes to Haftarot, but I've done my fair share of Haftarot during the year. I enjoy doing my Haftarot. He wouldn't forget. He would not forget when I was going to do a Haftarah. He would phone me a day or two before or leave a message with my wife. Are you doing the Haftarah on Saturday? Then I'm going to come to Shul. I'm going to come to your Shul and I'm going to listen to your Haftarah. He just made one feel special. And there's so much I can say about him, but I don't want to bore everybody because a lot of people have heard a lot about him. He was just a giant, in spite of his stature, he was just a giant of a person. And for the rest of my life, I'm just going to miss him terribly.
I want to tell a story about Rabbi Maisels and his wonderful wife, Esther. Rabbi and Esther, that's what I've always called her, were a team. They were beshert in the true sense of the word. Rabbi was with Esther, Esther was with Rabbi in my eyes. When the suggestion of the stories of Rabbi Maisels was suggested, I wanted to tell a special story that happened to us. We were members of Claremont Shul at the time. I grew up at Weinberg Shul with Rabbi Mervis being my rabbi. We then moved as a family to the big Claremont Shul, where I had my bat mitzvah, and then Jeremy and I got married with Rabbi Lerner officiating. Rabbi Lerner was our rabbi. Our boys were by choice brised by Rabbi Maisels, with him including Rabbi Lerner in the prayers. We decided to keep a Beth Din home and sent our kids to the Hebrew Academy, which was then in Saarbrand Park, even though our house was in Constantia, backing onto the Herzliya field. It was our way of life. We chose to teach our children more than we knew as both matriculated at Herzliya. Our kids were probably the only non-fully observant kids, but we were Beth Din kosher, and that was fine for play dates, etc. Long story carries on. With Pesach approaching, Esther was the head of pre-primary, and I still remember standing near her office and her asking us to join them for second night. I accepted. Our kids were 3 and 4, so this is almost 20 years ago. That night could have been last night. It is so clear to all of us. Saying Hallel every year, I always announce. I remember Hillel, who I never met before or after reciting Hillel. We assumed it would be a large crowd. Why would the rabbi and Rebbetzin of Camps Bay Shul invite us to Seder? We arrived. It was a Saturday night, and Esther waited for Rabbi, Hillel, who was out on holiday, and Gila to return from Shul, then light her candles and started to warm the supper. The table was beautifully set, but it was small. There was not a crowd. We were special. We were wanted. It was an evening, as I said, we will never ever forget. I had made some ceramics that Esther still reminds me she uses on her table a connection to that night. It sealed a relationship with Rabbi Maisels that I feel we had. I never saw him without going out of my way to say hello, share a memory or a laugh, a smile or a story. He always had time. He always made me feel what I was speaking about was the most important thing he had heard that day. Never forgetting to mention where Esther was, if not by his side. More recently in Israel, welcoming another grandchild to their family, who I wish a long and healthy life. Welcoming basically strangers and making us feel like royalty was so normal for them as a couple. But we were left comfortable as if it was meant to be. Esther always looked onto her husband, or as we call him, Rabbi, with such respect and admiration. And as we know, even with teaching, they taught us the same, for example, kashrut. The bond that they had as a couple was special. It was more than a rabbi and Rebbetzin. It was a gift from Hashem. It was a shidduch that was b'shet. Please God, may Esther live a long life and live with the beautiful memories. And Rabbi, I'm sure he's already at peace as he was in life. That's from the leader and Jeremy Seligson.
I just want to first of all say, with permission of the Rabbi and permission of the Maisels family, it's a big honor for me to actually say something. It's been very difficult for me this past month to come to terms with the loss of someone who's so close to me as Rabbi Maisels. And it's really been a tough one, but I feel that I'm now kind of in a position to be able to say something. I don't know if you know, but I did volunteer to go and wach, and I think that hit me even harder. It was a very, very difficult time for me to actually sit and wach for someone that was so close to me. And the feeling that I had, at least I think I got my closure by doing it and saying my Tehillim there. I spent about 4 hours waching over 2 days. It really hurt me. It really hit me hard. So it's taken me a while to say it. I wasn't sure I was going to say anything. And thanks to those who've encouraged me to say something, because I think it was the right thing for me to do. Everyone knows how close our family relationship is with the Maisels family. And so this evening, I've chosen to rather talk about Rabbi Maisels, or the Rov, the man, instead of expounding on the numerous stories and experiences that I've had the privilege of sharing with him and his family over all these years that we've known each other. And please God, we will still be sharing in future. Please God, we should only have simchas in the future. And I hope that what I'm going to say, it's a little bit different to what people might expect, but I hope it's going to be acceptable, and it'll be an aliyah for the neshama of Rav Tzvi ben Yeshayahu, Zichrono Livrocha. So Pirkei Avot, chapter 1, verse 6 tells us to choose for ourselves a rabbi or a teacher. And what that basically means is that we choose a mentor for ourselves who can guide us through our spiritual life. And I'm sure that you are not surprised for me to say that my choice of rabbi and my rabbi was, is, and always will be my Rabbi Maisels. And as you just heard, I always call him Rab, and I've called him that for decades. And funnily enough, people say he always called them by the Mister. For me, it was always by Neil. And I say that Rab was a unique and priceless segula, a treasure that Hashem bestowed upon us, the Camp Spey community, the greater Cape Town community, South Africa, and in fact, the whole world. He was known and respected internationally for his knowledge, capability, and his integrity. He was a spiritual person of note, and we are told that there's a spiritual and physical part to all of us. And the spiritual part of us in this world is always in conflict with the physical part of us. And that's because the physical part of us is always the one that gets distracted and is susceptible to being led astray, as opposed to the spiritual part of us, which is always pure. And that's why you sometimes see some of these very religious men praying that have a black belt or a belt on them, because they are dividing the two, the spiritual and the physical parts. What I can say is in Rab's case, I believe that the spiritual and the physical makeup were perfectly in sync and aligned and at peace with each other. He had absolute control over his physical desires. It was quite amazing. We are told that each of us is supposed to have a ray of Hashem within ourselves. And in life, generally, we as individuals possess some of these. I think in Rab's case, Hashem gifted him, as I said, a segula, with many, many more. I say this because he loved and lived for his Yiddishkeit. Unlike most of us, he had a knowledge and understanding of his mission in this life and was privileged to be blessed with it. He was a perfectionist, and things were either right or they were wrong. There's no in between. It was either yes or it was no. There was no maybes. He was very careful about his Lashon Hara, his Ma'arit Ayin, and not to embarrass people publicly. And the Ma'arit Ayin part of it was quite something in his life. He used to be absolutely pedantic about when he traveled, and we all know how he traveled, that he would be back in Camps Bay in time for Shabbos so that nobody could turn a finger and say that he wasn't doing what he should be doing for the community, and that they would have a Shabbos without a rabbi. So he was absolutely pedantic about that. And I think Hillel knows what I'm talking about when I say his father's a perfectionist, and I can see even from the Levaya that Hillel has a chip of that old block, because Hillel is also a perfectionist. So in my mind, I've kind of put together what I envisage Rabbi Maisels as, and this treasure and this gift that Hashem gave us. And I say he was like Abram because he was compassionate, he was welcoming guests, he didn't delay mitzvahs or even question them. He was like Yaakov with his learning and his offspring. Baruch Hashem, you can see what a support Esther's got, what a family, what a legacy is left behind him. He was absolutely like Yaakov. And like Yaakov, he had many, many hats to wear, both as a rabbi and a family man. He was like Yitzchak, making peace. He had this capability and this gift of being able to make peace. And he was like Moses with his humility. So I hope you can understand when I say that he was a gift from Hashem because he was unique. And as many of you may have heard at the Levaya, the remarks made by his children, that he was Hashem's banker. And in fact, added to this, he was a one-stop shop rabbi whose dedication and ability was absolutely unparalleled. I don't know too many rabbis who were capable of fulfilling the role of being a communal rabbi, a chazan, which included laning, a shochet, a moel, a member of the Beth Din, a sofer, a husband, a father, a grandfather. And for those who you remember him when he made his sermons, I dare say, was one of his words, and I think of Jack Friedman at this point, because Jack Friedman and I always used to count on a Friday night when he spoke, or on a Saturday morning where he spoke to a bar mitzvah boy, how many I dare says he said in one speech. And I dare say he held the title of being probably the world's most informed travel agent. Anytime I wanted to travel somewhere, I consulted my rabbi, and I was assured and guaranteed that he could give me the best advice of where to find the cheapest and flights available. I started off by saying that Hashem gave us Rab as a gift from his treasure chest. I also said that Rab knew what his purpose in life was, and I also said that he knew about succession planning and who to choose to succeed in. And for proof of this, we only have to look at the dedication and commitment of Rabbi Yochi Ziegler, who he chose as his successor to do the Shkita for Cape Town. I remember many, many, many times and many years we discussed, and Esther will recall this and verify, that Rabbi Maisels said that he would not leave Cape Town until he knew that he was redundant and that he could no longer contribute to the greater part of the Cape Town community. And who better could he have chosen, and more dedicated person and a more committed person than Rabbi Yochi, who in the last month has already managed to convince and pass all his tests and convince the the Beth Din in Johannesburg that he can do shkita on his own. And only this last week, on Monday, he did the shkita of the larger animals, the oxes and the sheep. And on Tuesday, I think it was, he went back and did 850 chickens, all on his own. So kol hakavod to Rabbi Maisels, who had the foresight to choose such a successor, and kol hakavod to Rabbi Ziegler, because we know that Cape Town, and Rabbi Maisels knows that he's left Cape Town in very, very capable hands. So to summarize, and I don't want to go on and on and on, because as you know, if I get into this subject, I can go on and on and on. And many, many, many times after Minchas, in the evenings during the week and after Shabbos, Rabbi Maisels cornered me and we would speak for at least an hour and a half together. So I could keep you going for many, many days, but I think that it's enough. So to summarize, the Rab was a full Monty. And it's only sad that after his passing, that his true value is realized and appreciated. Rab, we miss you dearly, and we know that you've been summoned to higher office. You are one of a kind. Yasher koyach, and we look forward to seeing you one day when we also get, please God, to Olam Haba and to get the reward and the zechut to actually be with you again.
That when Rabbi Maisels after Shabbat used to say the bracha before everybody ate, he said the bracha and then he would disappear. And where was he? He would fill a plate with food, and every Shabbat he would walk down and give Casper his lunch. Wow. Straight after he said the bracha. And in fact, when he left us, Casper remarked that he used to get lunch every Shabbat from Rabbi Maisels.
I just want to share two short stories about Rabbi Maisels, about my family. So the first one is my elder brother Stanley. Many years ago became a lot more religious and used to spend time in Plet and decided at some point he wanted to live there. But there really wasn't kosher food in Plet at the time, and he had to almost take it there or try and get it from somewhere far away. So he didn't know much about food. What he did know was eating food he knew, occasionally sharing food. But he decided to open a deli. So his first port of call, obviously, was Rabbi Ziegler, was Rabbi Maisels, who came to his help right away, where to get the things, how to source them, how to process it, and came down and helped him to kosher this old place that became this deli, serving food, takeaway food. And Rabbi Maisels was just always there to help him. And I think my brother was very happy, and hopefully some of the holiday makers that came to Plet also had a chance to enjoy some proper kosher food. And the last part of that I remember is, Rabbi Maisels was in touch with him a lot. I mean, I wasn't there, I don't recall, but Rabbi Maisels was in Australia, as he used to travel a lot, and was going to see my brother. And he messaged him to say, just a quick delay, I'm just going to stop off in Hong Kong to do a bris, I don't know, Chabad Shul. So, popping into Hong Kong was one of Rabbi Maisels' regular things, clearly a man for all seasons, as we knew. So yeah, the other little story is, more about my personal experience. And I mean, for years, Rabbi Maisels always was a supporter of CSO and security, as I think Rabbi Bonim obviously know the essence of that. But for us, CSO, the Super Bowl of days is obviously Yom Kippur, and that's clearly the longest day, the most important. And for us, there's so many people that come to short not aware of. So it's clearly tiring. It's a long day. You're fasting. There's strange people. You have to focus. It's quite demanding. And like everyone, you're kind of waiting for this fast to be over so you can relax and just get some food. So we're kind of listening out there. When is Nila? And we're waiting for that. Just the end of Ma'ariv, so that people can start eating and people rush out, pour through those double doors, attack the brocha. And then, no, not Rabbi Maisels. Rabbi Maisels would make his way to the top of the stairs, top of the shul, and he'd give it a little wave. And our lookout actually was Casper Daniels, who for many years decided to fast. And I said to him, he doesn't really need to, but he insisted in being one of the team. And maybe he was secretly planning to Magai, I'm not sure, but Casper would alert us. And then our whole team would trundle past the brocha and all stand almost in a circle in the shul, where Rabbi Maisels waited for us all to hear that shofar, because clearly we were outside, we wouldn't hear it. And yeah, he just gave one of those famous long, amazing shofar blasts that seems to be famous Camp Spatial Rov, I can see. And after that almost exhausting blast that we were getting even more tired listening to him, he would just like, you know, tilt his head and give that like boyish smile and say, right, now let's eat. And we kind of, you know, went to the brocha area and it was over. So I just remember you almost did that every year. So it was just two small things that I just recall offhand about Rabbi Maisels.
My name is Eli Adwin, English name Leslie. I've been living in Jerusalem since the early 70s. In 1965, 66, and 67, Desmond was my B'nai Akiva camp counselor, Madrich, for 3 years when B'nai camps were held at Port Alfred. I was 10, 11, 12, and 13 years of age. I remember him as a truly kind and compassionate person for which he later became much renowned. I was very much an outsider to the Johannesburg world of B'nai Akiva, which was a small Zionist youth movement back then, compared to the massive Habbonim. I do not remember much, but do recall that even at that time, he was far more serious about Orthodox Judaism than anybody else I knew, including rabbis with which I previously had contact. He doesn't write the name of those rabbis. I was one of the last remaining fully Afrikaans-speaking Jews and felt uncomfortable and stuttered when speaking English. So Rabbi Maisels spoke to me only in Afrikaans. I have clear memories of that. Rabbi Maisels also lost all the toes on his left foot in an accident, age 16 or 17. And I remember the flap of skin that came from under the foot and was tightly stitched to the foot's upper. It was all neatly done. And I remember him explaining to me in a very clinical way, as 'n mens nie tone het nie, en veral 'n groot toon nie, kan hy nie hardloop nie. And then he proceeded to run like crazy around the campsite to show that you could really run well without toes. Although he must have been in pain, I never heard him complain even once. He did wear closed sandals while everyone else wore open sandals. And when I asked him, he said he just didn't want to bring attention to himself, which I understood as avoiding sympathy when it should be directed to those less fortunate. After the age of 12 or 13, I never saw Rabbi Maisels again, but I did recall him often and like to think that large chunks of his personality live on in me. Although I cannot remember much about our general time together at B'nai Akiva camps, the very fact that I have extremely clear memories of him proves the impact he had on my childhood.
I've pretty much attended most of the commemorative broadcast in honor of Rabbi Maisels, primarily because we had a very close association and a sincere friendship with both him and the family. What struck me listening to the eulogies and the wonderful stories about Rabbi Maisels was that what I thought was that extra special relationship that I might have had with Rabbi Maisels actually turned out to be a special relationship that he had with everybody who'd come into contact with him. And it just personified what we all felt about the man. That same friendship, that era of confidence, that you could, the reciprocal respect that we all cherished. And the stories that were told, the very special associations that we had, I think we all had, you know, the bar mitzvahs, the weddings, both here and abroad. The time when Rabbi Maisels, Debbie and I went and sat on the 25-yard line at Newlands, and Jonah Lomo ran straight through Michael Catt to score the try against England in the 95 World Cup. And just by the way, there was a streaker that ran on the other side of the field, and Debbie grabbed the binoculars, had a look through and said, "Rabbi, I don't think he's Jewish." And Rabbi Maisels, you know, being a rabbi, he still had a good chuckle, a good laugh about it. Well, the times that we sat on the steps of the shul after Ma'ariv, the sun going down, and we sat there for an hour just chatting like a couple of old mates about everything. We laughed and we told stories to one another, and it was just a real pleasure to be in his company. Well, the time he popped across to my place, we were both needing to fill out our applications to renew our British passports. Both of us were Sotis, so to speak. His father and my father both came from the UK. And he arrived at my house that Sunday afternoon in his suit. I was washing my car. And in typical Rabbi Maisels fashion, off came the jacket, off came the tie, rolled up the sleeves and helped me wash my car. And then we got stuck into his maroon Corolla, which was a mission to wash, I might tell you. It was probably the first I've had in a year. But there were just, you know, some wonderful stories that I've had with him, and a lot that is similar stories to what all of you had. And I've kept those stories, and if I may just take with poetic license a description out of from computer technology. All those stories are saved on my hard drive. But the one story I really want to tell you is we were living in Camps Bay and had recently joined the Camps Bay shul. My father had passed away a couple of years later. He was a member of a shul in the southern suburbs. And it was a bit of it came as very suddenly, a great shock. And I called the shul that he was a member of and left a message on an answering machine. I left a second message and a third message, and I was getting calls from the hospital to say, you know, what are you doing about the Chevra Kadisha? When are they coming? And I was in a bit of a tiz, and eventually I phoned Rabbi Maisels, and I said, you know, you don't know my father, but this is the crisis that I'm at. What can I do? Don't worry, I'll sort this out for you. Well, not only did he sort out the burial, we had prayers in the southern suburbs he'd arranged for the entire week, not just Mincha Maariv, but early mornings, 2 cars would leave Camps Bay and drive all the way through to Constantia to have Shachrit at the Shiva house. And that's Rabbi Maisels going beyond the call of duty. What more can I say? You know, that relationship, that absolute sincerity was amazing. And I thought, how do I continue to say thank you to Rabbi Maisels? And it struck me, and I'm not going to drop names here, but in 1991, I was fortunate to be introduced to arguably the greatest footballer of all times. Met up in Europe, and I invited him out to South Africa. And in 1995, Pele arrived here, having agreed to come as soon as we got our politics sorted out. And we had a week together, and lots of wonderful stories about his personal life, which he confided in me as well. And he told me about a book that he had read, which had an impact on him. It wasn't the Torah, by the way, Rabbi. But his book was by Stephen Covey, The 7 Attributes of Successful People. And the book centers around 4 issues: to live, to love, to learn, and to leave a legacy. And I mean, having Rabbi Maisels having ticked every one of those boxes, and the book sold 25 million copies. So if you haven't read it, I'm sure you'll still find them available. But it was really a fantastic book. But it was the legacy that I wanted to try and maintain my relationship. And it wasn't just about remembering Rabbi Maisels during Shiva or Shloshim or in a year's time in the Yortzeit. It was about remembering Rabbi Maisels and what he meant to my family. I left out the part where he buried both Debbie's parents and mine as well. And it wasn't just that. It was about how can I remember Rabbi Maisels and see that wry smile on his face, that smile of satisfaction. And so I've decided that I'm going to take on one extra mitzvah, that every time I do that mitzvah, I will remember him, and hopefully it'll be daily. Just something that to say thank you to Rabbi Maisels for making a difference in our lives.
Baruch Daina Emet. It is with immense sadness that I inform you of the passing of my dear senior colleague, Rabbi Desmond Maisels, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Rabbi Maisels' sudden passing is a severe blow to the Cape Town Jewish community. He possessed a very strong work ethic and was a person of incredible integrity and honesty. Rabbi Maisels gave to the community in so many ways. He was a dedicated congregational rabbi for decades, and is the Rabbi Emeritus of Camps Bay Shul. He was a shochet, mohel, sofer, member of the Cape Beth Din, and head of the Cape Town Kashrut department. He worked tirelessly the improvement and enhancement of kashrut in Cape Town and traveled the length and breadth of the country inspecting factories, farms, and shops. Rabbi Maisels was a mentor of mine for many years and my go-to person when I started my career as a young rabbi in Cape Town. It has been a privilege and honor to serve with him on the Beth Din for the past few years. Rabbi Maisel and his dear wife Esther raised a family of God-fearing and committed children, all of whom live in Israel. His son Rabbi Hillel has followed in his footsteps as a congregational rabbi and a mohel. We send our heartfelt condolences to Esther and his children and grandchildren and to his sisters. May they be comforted together with the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem.
Our family was very, very involved with Rabbi Maisels from nearly the first day that he arrived as the rabbi of our synagogue. We were close to him, we visited him, and he used to visit us on many occasions. I really don't feel that a lot of my words will be equal to what I've heard from other members of the community, because some of them have been outstanding, particularly Brett Stein, who I thought was amazing. So I just will say just tell you shortly how he affected our lives. He was very close to our family from the beginning and taught both Justin and Stephen and officiated at both their bar mitzvahs, Stephen in 1985 and Justin in 1992. Apart from that, he did the brisses of all the three grandsons in Cape Town. That's Ethan, Rafi, and damn it, kill me for that. He went and he officiated at both Stephen's wedding in Johannesburg and Justin's and Trevor's wedding in Durban. And of course, Justin's wedding in Cape Town. I want to be fair to him. He didn't want to accept anything. He did his own bookings. He booked himself wherever he needed to stay, and he officiated the weddings. He wasn't asked. We mentioned that the kids were being married out of town, and he insisted in officiating. When our parents passed away, he was with us throughout the Shiva and the Shloshim. He used to come repeatedly. In fact, I always remember when he first came, he didn't wish us long life because the funeral had not been held yet. And he said, you don't wish someone long life before the funeral. I always remembered that. His skills surpassed his humbleness. We've heard it from everybody. He was always available, but not only was his presence part of the shul, but so was the Rebbetzin, and so was Hillel, Yael, Ora, and Gila. They were always there, they were always present, and they were always part of our whole family. I do want to tell one story which involved him in the 2 or 3 weeks before he passed away. I have a client in Zurich whose father lives in Cape Town and whose brother is buried in Pinelands. And her father is now 83, not well, and she wanted me to speak to someone to see if I could arrange that her father could be buried next to his son in Pinelands. The father was born in Europe during the Second World War, and unfortunately no one could find any proof of the fact that he was Jewish. He married his wife who was Jewish, but we were unable to find any written proof that he was Jewish. So I went to Rabbi Maisels, who investigated it, and he came back to me on the day before he died. We had a chat when he was in Nelspruit. He was visiting H. Hall and Sons to kosher the orange juice. And in fact, we had something in common because in 1965, I was part of a team that installed the water treatment plant, the new water treatment plant in Nelspruit, because H. Hall and Sons putting all their orange peel into the Sabi River above the town of Nelspruit. And by the time it reached Nelspruit, it had turned into green gunge. and we were having a good chat about the taste of the water in Nelspruit. And then we went on to this particular client of mine's father, and he said to me, pardon? Sorry. And he said to me that as much as it hurts him, that if the father is anyway Jewish, he must be buried in a Jewish cemetery. And he suggested that I go to the Progressive Hebrew congregation, the Reform Shul, to try and arrange matters through them. That was at 2 o'clock on the Thursday afternoon before he passed away. And even at that stage, neither he or I or anybody knew what would happen, but he was wholly involved in this particular small project. And what interested me tonight, Rabbi, was talking about your shlitta and the 850 chickens that were unfortunately slaughtered today. I went through a period of my life where I didn't want to eat meat because I couldn't handle slaughter, whether it was ritual or otherwise. And he came to my house on a Sunday morning armed with 3 or 4 different books to prove to me that, in fact, in terms of the Jewish religion, you could kosher kill animals and that Jews could eat them. And he saw my worry and my concern about this, and he took it on himself to put it right for me. And it's on those 2 stories which no one else told, although they must have said a lot of what I said earlier. I want to finish, and may his memory be blessed amongst us. And from my point of view, I continually think of him, and I'm so much the better person for having known him.
I have many fond memories of an outstanding student. I taught Rabbi Maisels in Port Elizabeth when he attended Hebrew school. It was a pleasure to teach. He also was the recipient of my late father of blessed memory, Rabbi Bloch's Chalafim, Shchita knives, that he used for Shchita, which he richly merited. So he will always have a special place in my heart. May his memory be for a blessing, and warmest regards to you, Cecilia Jasanovsky.
I'm not sure the exact year, but I think it was 1999 on my 65th birthday, which is in April. It's usually around about Pesach time. And we were at a committee meeting, and I turned around and I said to Judy, I'll sponsor the brocha. So Judy turned around and said to me, we don't have brochas on Pesach, it's Pesach. So I said, oh, well, I'm sorry, I'll do one later. So the rabbi turned around and said, don't worry, I'll do the brocha. And on the morning, he was there at 6 o'clock on his own, and he did the brocha. I think Michael Sternberg arrived at shul early and he got roped in to help. But the rabbi did the brocha, and that was the start of Pesach brochas in Camps Bay. There wasn't ever a brocha on Pesach before that, and I don't think any other shul had it before that. And then the brochas started. Shul started having brochas on Pesach, and it was due to him doing this.
Amazing.
I mean, he came and he did all the work, and it was a good brocha.
I'm not going to tell a story as such, but I'm just going to make a couple of comments that were very meaningful to me in my relationship with Rabbi Maisels. The first thing, I knew Rabbi Maisels for 30 years, from when he came to Camps Bay Shul, and a bit before. He already had a reputation at that time as being a very special man. And my father went to Constantia Shul to check him out. He was sent by Reverend Pactor to go see what Rabbi Maisels was all about. And I remember my dad telling me that Rabbi Maisels came to have a look at Camps Bay Shul, and at that time we didn't have the upstairs balcony. And he said, I'll only come to the shul if you build a balcony. So that was probably one of the first and only demands that I know that Rabbi Maisels made. But thank God we got him for 29 years. And I was quite blessed because where I stand in shul is right next to where Rabbi Maisels davened. So I was lucky. For 29 years, I stood next to Rabbi Maisels and davened on his right-hand side. And I always regard that as my zchut, that, you know, I can always say, Rabbi Maisels, you davened on my side, let me in to where I need to go one day, or please God, may the Mashiach come before that. You see, when I heard on Friday that Rabbi Maisels had passed away, I didn't believe it actually. I got a shock and I didn't believe it. And I think the chief rabbi pointed out that Rabbi Maisels was someone who was so full of life. You never imagined him passing away. And I say that in Cape Town, the rabbi was very special, and he had 15,000 friends. He literally had 15,000 friends. I think that's quite a unique thing to be able to say. And at this point, I would just like to mention that Rabbi Maisels wasn't interested in computers. He didn't like computers, and definitely not Facebook. But Rabbi Maisels had many more Facebook friends than you can have on the computer. And he always said if you spoke to him about the computer, he said, speak to Esther about it. Esther's on the computer. I don't know what he did at work, but at home, he definitely wasn't on Google or anything like that. I was quite fortunate in that Rabbi used to confide in me. When he had a problem, as a friend, he used to tell me what his problem was. And I, as his friend, if I can call myself that, used to confide, used to phone him. And the one thing about Rabbi Maisels is that at Rabbi Maisels' hesped, there must have been about 15 Cape Town rabbis, 15, I would say. And it was very inspiring to see, in a way, that was comforting, because these 15 rabbis, and I think they're fantastic rabbis, and I love them all, but they are going to follow in Rabbi Maisels' footsteps. But one day I wasn't so happy for some reason, and I phoned up Rabbi Maisels, and I said, and Rabbi Ziegler, don't take this personally. I said, Rabbi Maisels, I'm not happy with the young rabbis of Cape Town. So what was my complaint? My complaint was, when you phone up the young rabbis in Cape Town, you get their answering machine. And I don't like to get the answering machine. I like to speak to the rabbi. And one thing about Rabbi Maisels, no matter how busy he was, he always picked up the phone and he always had time to speak to you. And if I may say, the rabbi agreed with me, but nothing personal to the young rabbis. I can understand now why they haven't got as much time. So I just want to carry on and say that the one thing that I particularly respected about Rabbi Maisels, and I always regarded him as a rabbi amongst rabbis, was that he was my example of following halakha. He followed halakha. I remember I was taking medication one Yom Kippur, and I went to him and I said, Rabbi, can I take water for my medication? And he said, you can only take a certain amount. So, but I said, Rabbi, can't I take some more because I need to take it for my medication? And he said, no, you can't. He was quite strict about how much water I could take. And I really respected that he did it in such a natural way, but halakha was so important to him. I was also privileged to help him at times with kashrut and also as a witness at weddings. Also, the one thing Rabbi Maisels was very proud of was that he never missed a minyan, no matter where he was. I remember instead of going to Israel to the bris of one of his sons, grandsons, he decided to stay in Camp Space Shul because they needed him to lane. He wasn't going to go to the bris of his son because his community, of his grandson, because his community came first. And that's how he operated his whole career. He was also very, and it goes without saying, he was also very charitable to everyone. And I remember Rabbi Maisels, after every Friday night service, he said to me, Gavin, would you like to come for supper? And every Friday night I gave him the same answer, Rabbi, thank you, but my parents are at home and they expect me for supper. But what was interesting was that he still asked me the same question the following week. And I think that's a wonderful example, because sometimes we think people aren't needy. If they've got someone, they don't need things. But the Rabbi Maisels always inquired of you, no matter what your circumstance. And I would just like to end off with something which he told me. Rabbi Maisels had one regret, and I wonder, one regret. And what was this regret? He regretted having not studied Chazanut. He regretted not studying Chazanut. He loved to sing, and I'll never forget, I have a very fond memory in my mind in that I used to come to the Mincha Ma'ariv services, and very often I was the last one to leave. And as I left, I could hear Rabbi Maisels burst out into song. At the top of his voice, he sang the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur service. So he loved to sing, and as soon as there was no one in shul, he used to sing and really enjoy it. But I just want to end off by saying that, you know, I felt very sad on Friday. But suddenly on Shabbat, I realized, you know, I'm inspired by Rabbi Maisels. I want to try and be like Rabbi Maisels. I want to follow in his footsteps. And I think what Rabbi Maisels would have liked us was to, the word in Hebrew is to be makpid, to be careful with the mitzvot, to treat them sensitively, and to try and follow as many as we can. And he set the bar very high. But please God, in my life, I would try and follow in my great rabbi's example. I won't get to his level, but I will try the best that I can.
I just want to say that I remember him as a very good Jew. And I remember also one particular Saturday. It wasn't the only time, but when we came there for Saturday, we were sitting at the table, and the rabbi made me sit on his left when he said, Ebenont, and I sat on his left. I was the first one. And when he made a motzi and the challah, and we vased, and then he made a hamotzi, he gave everyone a piece of challah, and I was the last one to get it. And do you know why? I had to keep quiet while everybody else was getting the matzah, the challah, the bracha. I was the last one, so I couldn't speak. I had to keep quiet until I had the motzi.
So it's the only way to keep you quiet.
It's the only way to keep me quiet.
Evening, everybody. The first one is a tribute by Brian Oppert, and it goes like this. Rabbi Maisels was not a rabbi, he was a tzaddik that felt empathy and love for every human and every single Jewish community as if they were his own. There's a place in Shemaim for people like him that many do not get to peek behind. The most incredible stories I know about him are about his humility, his unpretentious humanness, built by his deep love and awe of God. Whatever he did was with dignity and a giving of spirit that was unparalleled. He treated Mashgichim no different to the head of the Beit Din. He was a world-renowned rabbinic authority within Kashrut. We have lost a rabbi, an Adam Gadol, a tzaddik, and most importantly, a person who lived up to the principle of love your neighbor as yourself, for I am Hashem. He lived with godliness. We have lost someone who taught holiness and his deeds and words. Our deeds are poor and insufficient to express who Rabbi Maisels was.
We are put into this world to do a mission for God. And the question is, what the mission, Hashem creates a mystery to what it is. Doesn't tell us what our mission is. But when that mission is concluded, we are to depart. That's it. That's how Hashem puts us in this world. Rabbi Maisels' mission has been fulfilled, more than fulfilled. Any of us are asked. Any person in Cape Town, anyone who knew him, is asked, did he fulfill his mission? Heavens, did he fulfill his mission? Day and night, 24/7, week after week, month after month, year after year. 40 years I knew Rabbi. And in 40 years, I never found him lacking in his mission. Never found him lacking in his mission. I faltered sometimes, we all do, but I never found him faltering. His energy, his dedication. Maybe we need to consider that Hashem says your mission is fulfilled. You come back to your. I know that this discussion. Sorry if I am a little bit emotional. I think I'm allowed to. I know that there's been a discussion about Moshe Rabbeinu, for example. I know Neil and Howard and I, we've been discussing. Do we have free will or do we not have free will? Of course, all the great sages throughout all the centuries, they all say that we have free will. And the question, of course, is, Hashem knows everything. If he knows everything, then where is my free will? He knows what I'm going to do. He knows what I'm going to say. He knows how I'm going to act. He knows how long I'm going to live. So if he knows all that, and I don't know yet, how can I have free will and he has already the knowledge of where I am going? And the rabbis explain, irrespective of the inability to understand the process, how Hashem functions, we need to understand that we are given free choices. But Pharaoh had his chosen take away from him. How can it be that Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, and this is the portion of this week, say, you keep on going to Pharaoh, you're going to keep on going. And I know that he's not going to let you take the children of Israel out of Egypt until I decide the time is right. So for some of us, like Pharaoh in his evil and Rabbi Maisels in his righteousness, Rabbi Maisels in his dedication didn't really have free will. He had free will, of course he had. Of course he had. But his mind was so focused on attending to the community, to the well-being, to the kashrut, to the bedin, to every human being that he knew and recognized. You can say his dedication took away the ability to have free will. And so it's something that we need to get our minds around. And sometimes we are steeped in a pattern of behavior which is totally and utterly dedication to Hashem in such a manner that what your plans are, they get put aside immediately because the mission of Hashem takes over. And that's what the Torah is saying about Pharaoh. Pharaoh was so evil and destructive against the nation of Israel that Hashem took away his will because he was steeped in evil. And there are those like Moshe Rabbeinu and Rabbi Maisels who are tzaddikim, complete tzaddikim, whose mission in life is so mighty and powerful, and the calling is so strong, that they will put aside any choices they made in order to dedicate their lives into the well-being of other people. So that is what he's talking about, not having free will. Of course he has a free will, but he always put others and the well-being of others, and his dedication to the community and every other thing in terms of Judaism and in terms of the Jewish people, that he was incapable of saying no to anyone who asked him to do some good and a mitzvah. He couldn't say that. And that's the man that Hashem has taken away from Cape Town, and Cape Town is poorer by the loss of Tzad. Okay. So I dedicate the shiur to my dear friend and colleague.
You might regret it, because I think when I was thinking about Rabbi Maisels, Alav Sholem, there were actually a lot of stories. And I'm going to touch on most of them because they kind of link up in the way he inspired me. And I have to give a little bit of context as well, so here goes. The Barnett family has really got a long history with Rabbi Maisels, my mother-in-law being one of the oldest members of the Camp Space Shul. But when I first came to Cape Town from Joburg, I actually was a member at Murray Road because my grandparents were there. And I used to sit next to my gran. But because Graham's kids had their B'not Mitzvah and Bar Mitzvahs, I came into contact with Rabbi Maisels on a personal basis quite a lot before I became a member of the shul, because they would often, as a family member, put me at the table next to Rabbi Maisels because they knew that I would be able to have a conversation with him. And so I already started getting to know him before I became a member of the Camp Space Shul and when I was living in Sea Point. And then we moved to Camp Spey, and I used to go one Friday night I'd go to Camp Spey, one I'd go to Sea Point, and eventually I decided, you know what, I live in Camp Spey now and I wanted to just, make it my place. And I started walking to shul and becoming a little bit more observant, and he was very helpful towards me with that. I mean, he said you can't do everything in a day, and I certainly haven't even done it in this many years, but he was great from that way. And he was very wise, Rabbi Maisels. He actually was a man of few words. He listened a lot. And then he would give a lot of thought to what you had said, particularly what I said, because it was often controversial. And then he'd tilt his head, and he had that little smile that would creep in on the side of his mouth. And sometimes he'd even give a little high giggle. And I thought, oh my goodness, have I pushed him too far this time? And he had a great sense of humor. So he would laugh, if I made a joke, sometimes they were a little bit contentious, but he would still laugh. And I think even though he took everything that he did really seriously, he was able to laugh at himself. I remember him shouting at us one Yom Kippur or in one of his sermons and saying how no one was paying attention to him, and that we were all sitting with our hands resting during shul. In one of his sermons, we were sitting there leaning our hands leaning our faces on our hands, and eventually said that I suppose it's not as bad as you all falling asleep, although I know that most of you do, and he laughed at himself like that because they sometimes did go on a bit long. I found him quite inspiring, and particularly I know it's been mentioned before, but his speaking of other languages, obviously the Hebrew, but his Afrikaans, and whenever I saw him speaking to Casper, it was always in Afrikaans, and he had a great relationship also with Temba, and at Temba's memorial service, when unfortunately Temba passed away, I know that he gave a little drosha in isiXhosa. And it so inspired me that the way that he actually managed to connect with people just by being able to converse with them in their language was something that inspired me. And I did a Xhosa course just because of that, because I could see what an impact it had on people. And it really has stood me in good stead as well. He was smart, I don't know how many people knew before now, but that Rabbi Maisels studied medicine before, not full medicine, but a couple of years of medicine before he became a rabbi. And when our son Jay was born, he had a deformity that needed to be seen to, and it would affect the bris. So I called Rabbi Maisels to come and have a look and speak to us, and should we do something about it? Shouldn't we? And he just had the most amazing, caring, empathetic way about him. And we decided, based on a lot of advice that he gave us, that we were going to go ahead with this operation. But he said it was very important for him to speak to the urologist who was going to do this operation, because the bris would affect the operation and the operation would affect the bris. So he spoke to the urologist, and he said to me afterwards, you know, I'm so interested in what he's going to be doing. Would you mind if I observed the operation? And I thought, jeepers, I mean, who would want to go and watch an operation on a baby, on a tiny baby or whatever? And then I realized, you know, this is something that he's so used to. And I said, absolutely, if the surgeon's okay, it will actually be wonderful. It will be a privilege for us to have you there. And he did. He went, he was at the hospital with us, and the surgeon said to him, so, you know, how many years of experience have you got? He said, oh, well, about 5,000 years. It was quite funny because the surgeon didn't get the joke, but we all did. Anyway, the operation took much longer than we expected, but after about an hour and a half, he came out to tell us that everything was going okay. And he said, you know, that surgeon is an absolute artist. It's just such a joy to watch him working. And then he said, I've got to show you what he did. And he whipped his pen out of his pocket and he started drawing on his finger. And I said, Rabbi, you're not allowed to draw on your finger. He said, it's not permanent. I have to show you what they're doing. And he did that. And then he could see how anxious I was. And so he really wanted to go back into the operation, but because he wanted to be there to give me support, and Cliff was there, he stood outside with us for another about 45 minutes, and he just regaled us with these anecdotes from all his Brit Milah experiences around the globe. He really had some amazing, amazing stories, which he didn't really have an opportunity to tell. So that was my first experience of him really being this amazing, actually a raconteur. He told the stories fantastically, brought the humor in, and we loved it. And also when his mom died and he was sitting Shiva, I went to visit him, and he was telling the most phenomenal stories. So one night when we were walking back from shul with him, they had invited us for Shabbat, he and Esther. I said to him, you know, Rabbi, you shouted us about not listening to your sermons, and maybe people just aren't really that interested in the parasha, but why don't you tell one of your stories every week and connect it somehow? Because they are so fascinating. And when you bring yourself in, it really makes a big difference. So he was quiet for a long time, and I thought, oh goodness, I've stepped on his toes. He said, you know what, I'll think about it. And the next week, he told one of his stories. And then afterwards, he came up to me, you know, when we all used to say Shabbat Shalom at the end of the service, and he said, so, how was it? And then every week after that, when I was there, he would go, you know, anyway, and I would give him the thumbs up, and they were great. I encouraged him to write them down, because I really thought it would be amazing for him to eventually publish a book. And he always said to me, I don't have enough time, but I honestly, I tried to press on him how important it was. And then I began to pester him so much that whenever he saw me at a function, before he even said hello to me, he would say, yes, I'll do it. But now let me tell you a story. And we'd find a quiet spot and he'd tell me about his latest adventure, where he'd flown, or the food that was served in Hong Kong at somewhere, and when he had a car accident and what happened to him and what a miracle it was that he'd survived, or a flight that had been delayed. I mean, he always had the most amazing stories. I also found him very tolerant. I mean, we didn't see eye to eye, and I mean, I challenged him a lot, like I like to do. Hey, Rabbi Ziegler. He was very principled. But you know what I loved is that when he could, he actually shifted some boundaries. So, for example, at Jay's bris, I said to him, I really want to say the bracha. I want to do the Birkat HaGomel. And he said, well, actually, it's the husband's job to do bench Gomel for his wife. And I said, well, I've seen a lot of places and other that they haven't, you know, that it's been the woman. So he said, well, show me where it is. And I did. And he said, you know what? Okay, you can do it. And he let me. And it was the same with the girls' Benot Mitzvah, although he didn't allow Ariella to speak in shul. We had a bit of an argument about that. But despite that, we didn't do it in shul for that reason. And he participated. We had Rabbi Sackstein there as well, who I grew up with. So it was very meaningful for him to do the service. But Rabbi Maisels was included in that, and he absolutely loved it as well, loved being a part of it. The same with Sydney's there. He did let her talk in shul. So as you can see, he shifted again. And then he wasn't our rabbi anymore when it was Jay's bar mitzvah, and I asked him about, it was on...
Hoshana Rabbah.
Oh yeah, thanks, Hoshana Rabbah. So, you know, depending on which shul and what the tradition is, some people put on, some men put on tefillin and some don't. So I had to ask him, like, what is the tradition in our shul? Because Rabbi Knopf didn't really know. So he was very helpful with that and how to condense the service as much as possible. And I asked him to do shachrit, even though he wasn't the rabbi of the shul anymore. He was so happy to do that. He said, I'll do anything, but I don't need to do anything. And, you know, Esther was away. She was in Israel then. And I said to him, you are coming to the function, right? And it was Sukkot. So he needed a sukkah. And he said, well, I'd love to, but a sukkah, and it's got to be. I said, but we've got a sukkah. I've put up a sukkah for you. And he just was, he was so touched, and he came and he loved it, and he celebrated with us. And it was just, it was very, very meaningful for us. Then another way that I know Rabbi Maisels is actually through Esther. I spent many Suda Shlishit meals in their home. She did the kosher course at our house, and he came to tell us, to explain about Shchita and some of the other stuff. Esther taught me at Melton. I'm on their board, so I've done a lot of work with her there, and with PJ Library. We go to the same yoga class. And I can just say that there would never been a conversation with Esther where she hasn't mentioned, as she referred to him, my husband in her American accent. And they were an incredible, incredible partnership. And he, despite people thinking that he might have been quite conservative, he actually empowered her. And you could see the way, what she did through her, how incredible he was as well. So I think I have now carried on one of his traditions by telling a very long story. Hopefully you all connected with that. And I think that we should all take that on and try and continue telling his stories so that they can be passed down and maybe even written down so that future generations can benefit from the wonderful man that he was.
Okay. Rabbi Maisels was an expert in explaining things to people without causing any embarrassment. One example of this stands out was when Gillian celebrated her bat mitzvah in 1992 at Camp Space Shore. I made everything for the Saturday brocha in the shore kitchen, as I usually did in those days, including baking a large bat mitzvah cake for the congregation to enjoy. After baking the cake, I decorated it and wrote her name on top. At the brocha, Rabbi Maisels got up to say a few words, and in his quiet, unassuming way, mentioned that this was a very special cake for a very, very special occasion. And because of that, we, the congregation, should only eat the outside pieces of the cake at the brocha, taking care not to disturb the name Gillian, which I had printed on top of the cake in the middle. He explained that this way, those attending the Saturday Mincha Mariv service in the evening could enjoy the top and the middle of the cake after the conclusion of the evening service and once Shabbat was out. When someone questions the reason, he very politely explained why we do not cut letters on Shabbat. At Mark and Yael's wedding in Israel in 2013, Rabbi Maisels came up to me at the reception and said quietly, Brenda, I was one of the people he called by his first names, please explain to me why the bride keeps changing her dress. I replied, what do you mean? He said, well, every time I see her, she has a different dress on. And I don't understand why the bride would change from her special dress, originally white one, and then change to a gold one, and then back to the white one. Well, in all my years of officiating, I've never seen this before. I then realized where it was coming from, and I started laughing, which puzzled him even more. I said, Desmond, she has an identical twin sister, and they both look, speak, and even dance the same. So much so that at the beginning, Mark started dating her. He got confused a few times. We then had a good laugh together, after which Rabbi Maisels was fully relaxed, And both Desmond and Hillel enjoyed the rest of the evening, late into the night.
Shabbos, everybody.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Firstly, I'd like to thank Rabbi
Shabbos.
Ziegler for giving me the opportunity to pay tribute to our beloved Rabbi Maisels of blessed memory. It goes without saying that it was with absolute devastation that we woke up Friday morning 2 weeks ago to hear the news of his passing. I don't think we can even begin to sink in the absolute loss, the devastation. We, not only as Cape Town Jury, but Jews around the world have lost. We've lost this giant of a man, because he played such a huge role, from being a rabbi to a shochet, to a mohel, to a sofer, a dayan. It's just a huge void that I think we're all going to struggle to actually fulfill or to fill, to replace. I haven't had the chance, unfortunately, to attend all the minyanim through the week due to other commitments. But as Rabbi said earlier, every night someone's had a chance to pay tribute to Rabbi Maisels and share a beautiful story, which everybody has of him. So I'm going to share some short stories, some anecdotes with you. So if you'll just bear with me. So to start off, Rabbi Maisels has had a very, very interconnected role in my family's lives. You know, on the saddest side of things, he's buried 3 of my 4 grandparents. He's bar mitzvahed Warren, Ryan, and myself. He flew to Hong Kong for 1 night and 2 days to perform the bris on Warren's eldest son, Idan, when he was living in Hong Kong. He married Danielle and I. He brised all 3 of our children, Joshua, Jaden, and Jed, as well as performing the Pidyon Ben on Joshua, which is quite a rare thing. And he also officiated in the wedding of my younger brother, Ryan and Jade. So Rabbi Maisels, he was the epitome of a mensch, someone who lived his life purely for Kiddush Hashem. He was the most humble person I have ever met and treated everyone with the utmost respect, regardless of religion, race, creed, or status. And he gave everybody 101% of his time. Not 100%, but 101% of his time. Nothing was ever too much. Whether it was going to a family that just suffered a bereavement after Shabbat and rocking up at 11 o'clock at night, so be it. It wasn't a problem for him. When my older brother Warren was learning for his bar mitzvah, and shortly just before his bar mitzvah, he got chickenpox. So my mother phoned Rabbi Maisels to say, listen, Warren has chickenpox, but that didn't deter him. He said, Mrs. Stein, in his polite way, don't worry, I've had chickenpox before. I'll come and teach Warren his bar mitzvah lessons. And I'm still not sure to this day if it was the good comics he enjoyed to read at our place, or because he had a job that he had to fulfill and get Warren ready for his bar mitzvah. When it came to my bar mitzvah, those of you who know, Parashat B'Shalach is the longest haftarah in the book. I don't know if it might be a few words short or longer than haftarah Yonah, but we're not going to argue this one now. My mother said to Rabbi Maisels as follows: Rabbi, I want my son's bar mitzvah on the 10th of February, 1990. Rabbi then looked in the Jewish calendar, and quite perplexed, he looked at my mother, again very politely saying, Mrs. Stein, this parasha, this haftarah is called Haftarah B'Shalach. I don't teach this haftarah to children. It's too long and I just don't do it. I think already he knew not to argue with my mother. My mother said the following words: Rabbi, this is the date. We've got the caterer. We've got the venue. There's a first time for everything. And he went and he taught it to me. And I think we did okay. I can't remember exactly, you know, every time it was a bris of my child, I always, to thank Rabbi, I wanted to get him a present. I don't remember quite exactly what we got for Josh's bris. But when it came to Jaden's bris, I approached the rabbi and I said, Rabbi, what can I get you? And he replied, he said, absolutely nothing. To me, just to fulfill the mitzvah of performing the bris on your son, that's a present in itself. And I said, I'm not going to accept no for an answer. He said, well, if you want to get something, maybe get something for the shul. I said, no, I want to get something for you, to thank you. He said, you know, I would like to get myself a suit, simply because Jaden was born in, his bris was on the 8th of August, and a month or 6 weeks later was Yom Tov. And for that particular Yom Tov, we weren't getting Chazan Adam Davis down to sing, and the rabbi was going to be the Chazan Rishon for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Now, in the good old days when it was my bar mitzvah and my brother's bar mitzvahs, when my late grandfather was alive and Roman's Outfitters was still around, we would just send him there to get a suit. And I said to Rabbi, Rabbi, listen, I'm no expert in shatnez and any of that kind of stuff. I don't want to get it wrong. Please, will you go get a suit and just send me your bank account details and the amount, and I'll put the money straight in your account. And he phoned me about a day or a few days later, and he said, listen, I found a great suit. It's beautiful. I love it. But now, just to let you know, I'm also going to get myself a shirt and a tie, but that's not going to be for your account. And I said, Rabbi, absolutely not. Whatever you want, please go get the shirt, go get the tie, just send it to me and I'll pay for it. You know, he phoned me to tell me, but I could hear the excitement on his voice. It was almost as though someone had just deposited 5 million rand in his bank account. He was so appreciative and so thankful. And I remember very, very clearly on Erev Rosh Hashanah, when he got up to deliver his Dvar Torah on the pulpit, he looked at me for a second and he looked down his suit and he gave me like a wink and smiled, and then he started his sermon. And really, it just left such an impression that I still will not forget, just appreciation and gratitude. When it came to Jed's bris, well, I approached him again. I said, I know we're not going to have this fight now. What can I get you? Do you need another suit? He said, no. I've got my suit still. It's in perfect condition. It's lovely. I said, what can I get you? And again, he looked at me and he said, if you really want to get something, Esther and I, we love Haagen-Dazs ice cream. And I looked at him and I went like, are you joking? Just Haagen-Dazs ice cream? He said, that would be amazing. And I got Danielle, my wife, to buy a few tubs of Haagen-Dazs ice cream and drop it off at him. And I bumped into him maybe 4 weeks or 5 weeks later at a bar mitzvah at Morasha, and he came up to me and we asked each other how each person was. He says, you know, we've still got some Haagen-Dazs ice cream left in the freezer that we only have it on special occasions. I said, Rabbi, please just don't make it a special occasion. If you want more, please just let me know. But again, the gratitude and appreciation for something so small, which, you know, it just says a lot about a person. Just before my bar mitzvah portion last year, which was the 8th of February, which was my 30th anniversary of my bar mitzvah, I asked Rabbi if he would come to Camp Spey to listen to me doing my haftarah. And I don't know if you guys remember, but a month or two or so before that, he had just had his heart attack. So I said, Rabbi, you know, I fully understand if you can't make it, but if you could, that would be absolutely amazing. And he looked at me. It was at one of our Thursday single malt minyanim that he was there. And he said, Brent, I wouldn't miss this for the world, and I will be there. And he walked through and he listened to it. And I think that was probably the best rendition I've done today of my haftarah. And I could just see the pride in his eyes that I'd done it so well. And I had a chance to speak at the bracha afterwards and really got a chance to thank him for everything. So being around Rabbi Maisels has made me, and I'm sure others, want to be a better person, as he's always done everything for the right reasons. You know, never ever for self-gain, but to always help a fellow person, and by so doing, fulfilling mitzvot, no matter how big or small. That was his purpose. So just last Sunday at about 7:30 p.m., which, as you know, is never ever a really good time, especially not a good time when you've got 3 young children. I got a frantic call from yours truly, Rabbi Ziegler, to tell me that he had just completed his jog from the parking lot of Lion's Head to Signal Hill. And what he had done is he'd taken his whole bunch of keys and just separated the remote and kept that in his pocket to prevent the keys from clanking in his pocket. Rabbi is quite a serious runner. And either on the way there or on the way back, this remote had fallen out. So he asked if I could please come and assist him. And as soon as I put down the phone, I jumped in my car without any hesitation. And whilst driving up, I actually asked myself a question. What do you think Rabbi Maisels would have done? And I carried on driving with a smile on my face, ready to go and help. When I got there, I saw Rabbi Ziegler quite frantically still searching for this remote. And he was about 1 kilometer from where he had parked the car. So he had come back and already walked another kilometer. And when I looked at him and said, listen, Rabbi, this is like looking for a needle in a haystack. And his reply to me were, Brent, believe it or not, miracles do happen. I said, fine, okay, let's go with it. So I parked my car and I went onto the opposite side of the road and started walking. I hadn't walked as much as 50 meters. and there was this remote control in the middle of the road. Now, it really is miracles do happen, because how a car didn't go over this remote, which was in the middle, not on the side of the road, in the middle of the road, one doesn't know. But we found the remote and Rabbi was happy. You know, I could go on and share stories about Rabbi Maisels, of how great a man he was, because he really was an unbelievable man. And I think one of his greatest attributes was he wasn't a talker, he was a doer. And I've come up with a bit of an idea that we can all hopefully live by throughout our daily lives. And that's called having a Rabbi Maisels day. So what is a Rabbi Maisels day? Where every day, no matter how big or small, you do something for the better of someone else and not expecting anything in return. And by doing this, we'll all be fulfilling a mitzvah in his name and giving his neshama an aliyah, which it so richly deserves. And lastly, I've put together a short slideshow as part of a tribute to Rabbi Maisels with my family. I'm sure all of you have got as many pictures as I do and can also do this. And let me just, my disclaimer is I'm no professional. I did this on my own on some app, but I think it gets the message across, and I'm sure you guys will enjoy this nonetheless. And the song that I chose for the slideshow is a song called Shir Tikva, which is called the Hope Song by an Israeli artist, Miri Masika. And it's very appropriate given the world we are currently living in. But there is hope. And if you listen to the words of the song, she says, Ma yiyeh machar ein ish yodea, which loosely translates as, what will be tomorrow? No one actually knows. Because we really don't. But let's try and incur Rabbi Maisels days in our lives to make this world a better place for us all. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and enjoy my slideshow.
זהו התחלה, דף חדש אתה נוגע. ביום הזה תישא תפילה, תדע שיש מי ששומע. אל תוותר מיד, ויש לך מרחק ללכת. אל תוותר מיד, אם לא עכשיו אולי עוד שנה. היום הזה הוא התחלה, תחשוב אתה יכול אחרת, והתשובה לשאלה בתוך החיים מסתתרת. אל תפחד עכשיו, כי לא עבדה לך הדרך. אל תפחד עכשיו, אם לא היום אולי עוד שנה. עולם מוזר, כולו שלך, כשהתקווה בלב בוערת. יש בדידות, יש כאב, והתקווה איתך נשארת. אל תאבד אותה, תשמור עליה. מה יהיה מחר? אני יודע. זה אתה ראשון, בעצמך אתה בחרת. היום הזה הניצחון, בעצם זה שלא נשברת. התקווה בלב בוערת, יש בידוק, יש כיף, והתקווה איתך נשארת, אל תאבד אותה, תשמור עליה. מה יהיה מחר, אין איש יודע.
This week's parasha, of course, speaks of Moses, our great leader. And I want to just share with you two of the qualities that I believe Moses had that made God choose him as a leader. And these were really shown, and these attributes are something that Rabbi Maisels had. Over the years, I've had many teachers. Many people have guided me and informed my decisions and been mentors to me. And I've really been privileged to, especially for the last 7 months, I'm training how to do shechita with Rabbi Maisels in the last 7 months. Besides for 4 Mondays, we spent every Monday together for 7 months, from before the crack of dawn, before 6 o'clock in the morning, till we come home late at night. I've had the privilege and the priceless gift to spend time with Rabbi Maisels and to get to know him and to hear stories from him. Many people I learn from what they say, from what they write. From Maisels I learned from what he did, just from watching him. It's called Shimush Talmidei Chachamim. It's one of the highest forms of learning when you just watch somebody and just from what they do, how they talk, how their hands move, how their eyes make or don't make contact. Every breath of his is full of instruction, of guidance, and of light. That I was privileged to see. As I look at the screen and I see names and people that knew him so much longer than I did, your life must be filled of thoughts and stories and of guidance from the great man, whether it's at your life cycle events, whether it's at Shabbat, whether it's meeting him in Checkers or seeing him at a factory. He was just a person that taught constantly. The two things that I really want to talk about is his love of people. Everyone is amazed. Everyone who I've spoken to and everyone knows that Rabbi Maisels didn't forget people, dates, and times. When you'd come to do your son's bris or when you'd come to do your friend's wedding, he would remind you that 32 years ago on a small street out in, I don't know, Pofada, he met your uncle and he was doing this and he said this. And he'll tell you the other story of when he was in Bloemfontein, how your great-grandfather said ABC to him and how it made him and inspired him and changed his life. He remembered the date, he remembered the time, and he knew your family. And as a rabbi, it's something that we all try to do. we have to know our community. But for him, it wasn't the effort, because he loved the community. The people on the call, the people in Camps Bay, the people that he served and that he worked with were people that he loved. And for him, it was obvious that he knew them because they were his friends. They were his people. They were his people. He absolutely loved each one of you. I've got many stories. Some maybe I shouldn't repeat, but he would tell many stories about the members of Camps Bay. And when I would mention, oh, this one had a simcha, and this one had a bris, and this one, his face would light up. And he'd say, oh, I remember. And he was talking about his buddies and his close friends and people that were really in his heart. And the truth is, God saw that in Moses. Moses was the same. Our sages teach us that what was the ultimate decision, what made God choose Moses? When Moses was shepherding the flock, the literal flock of his father-in-law Jethro, and one of the sheep ran away and ran to the well, and Moses ran after it and picked it up and said, oh, if you would have told me that you were thirsty, I would have picked you up myself. And Moses meant it. His flock, what he looked after, he loved each one of them. And God said, someone like that, that's who I want to lead my flock. Someone who cares for each individual, cares for them, will go out of his way, around the world, catch a flight, catch another flight, miss his flight, whatever it is, whatever needs to be done, wherever it needs to be done. He would do it for each one of us, and we knew that. That was Rabbi Maisels. The second trait, so love of people, ohevet habriot, loved everybody. And that's why he remembered all the dates and times, and that's why he would go out of his way, because he loved them. He loved you. And that's how he would do it. The second major midah, character trait that I saw from him, was his drive to serve. He was absolutely driven by a commitment to serve his community. I saw this I got it by hearing his stories, and the first time we met in Shechita was on, it was the end of June, 2020. June in Cape Town at 5:30 in the morning. I'm sure we all know what it looks like. It's miserable. It was wet. It was foggy. And Rabbi Maisel said, well, we're meeting 5:30, so we can be at the place by 6:30, 6:45. And on the way, he was telling me what he had done on Sunday. Because Sunday, he had also driven around half the country, checking on factories. And for me, that really epitomizes a drive to serve. He wanted there to be kashrut. He wanted there to be kosher food in Cape Town. He wanted there to be kashrut. He wanted kosher food to be available. And if that meant he needed to get up early in winter and drive for hours to make sure that there was kosher meat, kosher food, kosher whatever, he would do it. I remember one story, and as this story unfolded, I just thought to myself, this is a story that really epitomizes Rabbi Maisels. And there's many of them, but the one I want to share with you is really stuck out for me. It was a very hot day in Malmesbury. We had been shechting the whole day. He had been driving around on the Sunday, and he had many, many plans for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And he was looking forward to eventually ending the week on Friday afternoon, I don't know, an hour or 2 hours before Shabbos, he planned to get home. And in the hot afternoon, after the full day of shechita, of slaughtering, I was exhausted. He was exhausted, although he wouldn't have said that. And he was telling me about his plans for the week. He said straight from here, he's going to, he was planning a trip to Oudtshoorn and then around all the different things that he was going to do. And I mentioned to him, I said, Rabbi Maisels, doesn't it say in the Pirkei Avot, in the Mishnah, Lo alecha hamalacha ligmor? The work is not for you to complete. You don't have to do all the work. And I'm sure many people have told him before, take a break, take it easy. And he folded his hands and he looked down at the floor. He shook his head as the way that he does, that he did. He said, I don't know about that. Every single thing that was written in Pirkei Avot, he kept. Everything that was written in the Torah, he kept. He put his life to keep every word of the sages, every word of the Torah, every word of God. But this he had trouble with. Lo alecha melacha ligmor, Rabbi Maisels. You didn't have to finish the work. And he said, no. No. He was committed to serving. No, I have to finish the work. I've got to make sure that it gets done. If it means inconvenience for me, if it means I'll be at home late, if it means I have to really make a big effort, that doesn't bother me. I've got to make sure it gets done. I want to end off with one thing. One thing he wasn't good at was taking a break. That's one thing I did not learn from him. Please God, I learned that from someone else. But from him, I did not learn how to take a break and how to say, enough. I've done my work and now I'm going to fold my arms and take a break. And I'm grateful. And it's from Hashem that he passed away Erev Shabbos, Friday afternoon, Friday morning. And this Shabbos, he'll take the break that he deserves and that he needed. And that without doubt, he can sit and say, I've done my bit. I worked to the end. I served my community till my last breath. And now his soul can be at rest. And at peace. And he can look at us from Gan Eden, from the place where it's just peaceful. There's no factories to see, no brisses to travel around the world to do, no weddings to do, no people to take care of, but just God presenting him with his rich reward for a life of love of community and a life till his last moment of service. True servant of God and servant of his community.